Today let's start the story of what if Izuku got harem with 100 girls who loves him. Izuku took a deep, long breath before bowing deeply before the girl in front of him, who in turn gasped slightly in surprise. Shutting his lips tight, he mentally recited his confession while focusing his sight on his bright red shoes. The spring air drifted softly, warm and comforting, just like the slight push of encouragement he needed right now. Told me ever since we've had the same homeroom class together, I knew I liked you. His right arm shot up diagonally from his position, holding out a single flower for her. Would you please be my girlfriend? Immediately after asking, his breath hitched and he held it, the coat of his middle school uniform feeling way too tight as he did before he heard her breathe deeply. Midoriya, you're a very sweet guy, and you're honestly amazing. I love how badly you want to be a hero too. Izuku's eyes widened slightly with excitement. For some reason, I get so sick when I think about dating you. I'm sorry. Jiga. Izuku croaked as pain pulsed deep inside his chest, like his soul itself was gut-punched. Tomi excused herself, leaving Izuku to fall to his knees as his heart and spirit broke into shards. His arm slumped down, his flower dragging across the ground as he did. The warm spring air suddenly felt like it drifted right through him, and became a heavy and cold draft that made him want to just shrivel up and die. With a small sniffle, the young man dragged himself from his knees back onto his feet, wiping his knees of dirt, and trudged towards the gate to go home, and maybe shrivel up there. Just as he passed the gates, the sounds of his feet nearly dragging across the ground were soon accompanied by another set of feet, just to his side and behind him, tailing him for a full block. Not that Izuku paid any mind, but by then he gave a deep sigh, and the person behind finally pipped up. Damn, that bad, huh? Izuku closed his eyes for a bit and raised his head slowly before looking back at Katsumi. Yeah, that bad. She said she felt sick at the thought, he explained, before turning away in shame and sniffling again. Katsumi sighed shortly, her shoulders slumping a bit as she walked over and patted Izuku's shoulder awkwardly. Given the difference in statures, the simple, apathetic but trying gesture rocked the smaller boy's entire body like a scale. Deku, look, I'm sorry but I just have to get over it, I know. He finished, before wiping his eyes and nose with his sleeve, then making a determined fist and pursed his lips tightly as he looked up to the sky, small pink leaves fluttering by, and to an eccentric like Izuku, two crossing or close ones looked like flying hearts, like a divine gesture to say love is in the world. Why yeah, I'm a lover, so there will always be another girl, right? And no matter how many times I get rejected, he asked, as Katsumi just nodded stiffly. You're like an unrelenting hero of love or some crap then. The blonde bomber put her hand to her chin, her brows furrowing slightly more than usual. Say with that Domi chick, how many girls those that make it? Izuku chuckled timidly. Why you mean rejections? Exactly 100. If Katsumi had a drink she would have spat it out, even backing away slightly as her brow furrowed at Izuku. Damn, more like a monster of love. Don't you have any standards? Shit, any shame? I've got plenty of that, I assure you. Ignoring her short friend's comment, Katsumi began to wonder again. Still, don't you think it's weird? She asked hypothetically, turning upward a bit as Izuku tilted his head slightly at her with curiosity. You'd think by now everyone's opinion of you would be in the shitter, but the girls seem to like you. As a friend, of course, she explained, instantly slam-dunking Izuku's hope back into its grave. You're pretty nice, awful generous, you're top of the class with me, you're respectful, even to those shitty teachers, and you don't look that bad, if pretty plain and scrawny. Honestly, what are you doing to get rejected so much? Kachina, are you like, hitting on me, or insulting me? Izuku asked, and after a short, awkward pause Katsumi answered. As if anything, I'm pitying you. Pouting, Izuku just turned straight ahead and the pair walked in silence for a good minute before Izuku sighed again and slumped enough to draw Katsumi's attention. I wonder if I'll ever get a girlfriend, he muttered under his breath, looking down slightly before Katsumi's hand slapped onto his shoulder and stayed with a light grip, again making Izuku tremble under it from the weight, clearly being the young woman's idea of a reassuring hold. Deku, I gotta ask. Why are you so dedicated to this crap? Between this and all your stuff about heroes, you're starting to scare me, man. And to that, he didn't really have an answer, he just looked up, but inward as well. I don't know. Everyone wants love, don't they? Maybe I'm just sensitive to the feeling. She stared down at him for a moment or two, before Katsumi just shook her head. Not me. I couldn't really care less. Plus, getting into a relationship now would just be a stupid distraction anyway. She pointed up one finger, then a second as she continued, and, you already have me to hang out with, so it's not like you're some loner. Don't you want to get into you? Izuku's gaze turned to the side as he pouted again, while still mentally acknowledging she had a point. Can't you be at least a little merciful? I am. She answered bluntly. After that, Izuku just changed the subject entirely, whipping out his hero notes from his backpack to talk about the latest entries, or just things in general said heroes reminded them of, to the news, and back to UA and their future, until soon enough they were at the fence of the Bakugo household. Hey, Deku, you want me to walk you home or something? My old man's working late anyway, so no one's waiting. She offered, stopping to lean against the brick wall of a fence. No, but thanks for the offer, Kachan. I need to run a small errand on my way home anyway. Oh, I really needed to talk to someone about today, you know? Thank you, a whole lot. He smiled softly, the pain still visible on his face, but nulled and filled with enough hope to let Katsumi know her friend would just bounce back again. Yeah, it's no problem, but if you want to thank me really, I have a question. Izuku nodded curiously. Just out of curiosity, the hell is your type? Izuku paused, the wind whistling by before he tilted his head. What? Katsumi stiffened slightly as if she were caught doing something, looking away with embarrassment. I mean, I know you ain't picky or anything, but 100 confessions since you were like, 8 months old? She looked up, raffling through her mind. A new crush, new confession about every 40-something days? Maybe 50? Did you just do all that in your head? Ignoring the question, Katsumi just asked again, so what's your type? Or even, just the ideal girl, I guess, since a monster wouldn't really have a type, I think. Izuku was quick to shrug. I don't have one, really. There's beauty everywhere if you're really looking. He stated, smiling again dreamily. This time there's something to enjoy and appreciate with everyone. Even if I fall for a girl who has nothing in common with me, I still see how enthusiastic and passionate she is about what she does, and I can't help but fall for them. Oh. Was all Katsumi could say, before turning to her house. Oh, right, Yomi or whoever was really into photography, you said, right? He asked, turning to see Izuku on his knees again, gasping in pain from just the mention of her. Even though it took a minute or so to recover, Izuku still dragged himself to his feet again and began to go home, but taking a small detour to a shrine about halfway there. Particularly, a shrine for a god of love and matchmaking. It was humble, small, and old, and while it was nice and cleaned appropriately, it was still obvious not many people came here on any basis. Alone, he stood before the shrine and clapped his hands together in prayer, his entire form trembling slightly as he squeezed his eyes tight. Oh, great Buddha of love! May you please bless me, and grace my high school life with happiness, and a girlfriend? Worry not, my son. Suddenly, Izuku perked up, and the wooden wall of the shrine that was previously blank had what Izuku almost mistook for a mask or ornament, but no. An elderly man's face was phasing through the palette with a focused, collected expression. He had a clear bald head that shone in the light, and a long white beard that reached more than a foot down. And then he blinked while making eye contact with Izuku. Izuku cried out in panic and jumped backward. Whwa? Are you a thief? Thief? The old man squawked, blasphemed and shocked at the accusation before shaking his head, returning to his collected expression. Then, he rose out of the pallet, phasing through like a ghost and drifted a foot into the air. "No, I am the god of this shrine, the great Buddha of love," he exclaimed, a pink sunshine-like ray emitting from behind him. Izuku gasped, feeling himself surround her to wonder as he stepped slightly closer to the god. Wow. Indeed. The Buddha said, before floating down to his feet, not making a sound as he did. "Now, my boy, to answer your question, there's no need to worry." There isn't? The old Buddha shook his bald head. "None, my boy. I have much to tell you, about your love life and what the future foretells," he informed, sitting down against the shrine's base like a bench, before tapping the spot beside him. Hesitating for a moment, Izuku gulped as went down to sit, although fairly stiff. First off, the god of love began, clapping his hands together as he seemed to organize his thoughts. "I assume you're familiar with the term, soulmate?" Izuku gasped again and turned to him, filled with joy and a wide smile. A soulmate? I have one of those?" Wincing a bit from the point-blank yelling, the Buddha of love continued. "In a way, yes, you see, everyone in this life is born with a set amount of fortune like a currency. Some who have enough will be soulmates with each other, and others get no problems getting to their objects of affection. Some are unfortunate enough to never find true love, and so on." Izuku nodded in understanding to the sound of scribbling. The Buddha of love's brow furrowed slightly before he looked down, his eyes widening slightly and his mouth open, about to ask how and when that notebook came out, but decided against it last second. Anyway, you, my boy, had enough fortune to receive a soulmate," he explained, his voice quavering a bit and looking to the side, as if embarrassed. "Or at least, that was the plan." Izuku squinted a little and bent forward so he could see the old god's slightly red face. Excuse me?" he asked, truly attempting to sound polite but also conveying a very underlining tone of Kasumi-esque bluntness in his voice. The Buddha of love inhaled sharply and miserably. "Why, you see, every person has a sheet which we gods fill for every person, yes. Well, when I was making yours, the castle in the sky was on TV, so." "Wait, what?" he interrupted, taken aback by the mental image before the old god raised a finger to tell him to pause, genuinely looking as if he'd rather end his immortal life than be forced to continue, but perhaps by some obligation he did. "I may have goofed up, my boy," he admitted, coughing into his fist. "I was just finishing up with yours. The last thing I needed was to fill out the soulmate tab and a few others below that and submit it. And I did just without looking." Izuku's breath hitched in his throat as the Buddha rubbed the back of his neck. And when you submit the form, it's set in stone, no take-backs," he explained, before finally turning back to Izuku. "In short, my boy, I didn't give you a soulmate, I've given you 100. The last statement echoed in Izuku's brain, ringing like a gong that oppressed every other thought he could have had at the moment. 100. That is COR. Like 100? Izuku squawked in a panic. The Buddha of love could only nod, ashamed. "Indeed, and that massive fortune is kinda why you've had no luck with the ladies up until now, because all your love fortune went to that one massive blessing. It is your fate that the moment you enter high, you are set." "I get into Izuku shouted, jumping up suddenly, bouncing on his heels as the old god rubbed his ear slightly from the sudden outburst. The sudden affirmation made him feel like he could just cry outright soulmates you. Buddha's sea castle in the sky. He uttered, information filling his brain faster than he could compensate for as he shook his head slightly. If allowed to continue, he probably would have looked like an odd zombie and left groaning nonsense like one too. Apparently anyway, over the course of 3 years you attend you will encounter all 100 of your soulmates. However, you'll only meet each other. What happens after is entirely in yours and their hands, my boy. he confirmed, looking Izuku up and down to check whether or not the poor lad was going to collapse, physically, at least, since he seemed well on his way to a mental collapse against his precious shrine. Suddenly, Izuku perked up and his eyes widened with realization. Wait, how will I know? HM? When I meet one of my soulmates, how will I know? He asked, still tripping over the word given how surreal it all felt. I mean, I told myself the girls in the past were probably my soulmates, but you just said they weren't. The Buddha of Love just raised his hand slowly and snapped. Suddenly, Izuku felt a shock go through him, not a painful electric shock or like the sudden shock after being hit out of nowhere, but a sudden rush of pure energy. His heart raced and his eyes focused exactly straight like he was trying to see through the wall, but it started and ended within half a second. You felt that, my boy? Izuku nodded frantically, panting as he grabbed his chest. Did you give me a heart attack? He accused, taking a step back. I don't control hearts like that, boy, the old god sniped back before sighing. What you felt was love at first sight. When you make intimate, direct eye contact with your soulmate, you both will feel that sudden rush. He explained, now propping up his head on his hand. Plus, now you're convinced I'm not just some geezer having a laugh now, do you? Izuku flinched slightly, mumbling out, he got me. In response, before he rubbed the back of his head and nodded. Why yes sir, sorry to doubt you, but even you have to realize how crazy this sounds. The Buddha shrugged. Yeah, that's fair. Even I didn't believe it when I realized what happened. I thought some angels were just punking me, he admitted, shaking his head. Anyway, I'm giving you this ability because when it comes to love, there's this very important distinction, he began, sitting up a bit straighter. Men tend to fall in love over time, and even when they meet their soulmates they probably won't know it, while women tend to fall in love at first sight, like that. Therefore, I'm giving you this now so you'll all would be able to tell right away instead of having to guess. I see, thank you, Buddha. Izuku sighed shortly and cupped his chin. Well, Kachin did say that getting into a relationship now would get in the way, and if I have to wait until you anyways, he mumbled, before looking back down at the Buddha of Love. My boy, if you want my advice, prepare yourself in that time, get stronger so you can be the hero you want to be, and enough to protect everything, and everyone, you'll come to love. He said, making a fist and a short pump-up cheer. I'll be rooting for you. Smiling, Izuku nodded. Alright, thanks. Wait, why? He asked, tilting his head again as a realization hit him. I mean, by all accounts I'm just a mistake, right? The Buddha just snorted. After I realized what happened, I had to look to the future to see how it would most likely end up. Then I realized it may not be so bad. He put it simply, his mouth turning to a small smile beneath his thick beard. Really, like what? And the Buddha just stood again with a small stretch. I can't say why. But I'll say this, the reason I came down to give you help is that you, Izuku, are an investment. But be wary, he warned, pointing his finger down at Izuku as he straightened up. The future only shows what may be, and what is most likely, but any major change could redirect your entire life into a brand new course, so you must be very, very careful, and make all your decisions wisely, or all of this is for naught. Izuku lay in bed that night restlessly, the Buddha's words echoing in his mind endlessly. It felt too surreal, that things like this don't just happen to quirkless nerds like him. He sighed and turned in his bed, clenching the cover tighter. 100 soulmates, he repeated, the words trudged off his tongue with a heavy, nerve-wracking feeling. Izuku wanted to be a hero, someone who acted like a pillar or a shield, a symbol of peace for all like All Might was. On top of that, he wanted to be an ideal boyfriend, a man who would always be there for his beloved, to be reliable, responsible, trustworthy enough, good enough to deserve that love. Two problems dawned on him to the point of suffocation, both of which being foils to both of these ideals: expectations and doubt. His mom, Katsumi, Aunt Mitsuki, And Uncle Masaru gave plenty of encouragement when it came to becoming a hero despite the fact that he was quirkless, and he knew he could try his best, and work as hard as he could, but there was always that doubt: what if he couldn't? What if he wasn't enough? What else can he even do? No matter what he did, or what anyone did, there was a limit, so where was his? How would he know, lest he reached it suddenly, and everything he worked for comes crashing down without warning? His stomach turned slightly as he looked up at his wall, reading over an All Might poster. It was simple enough, just a tall portrait of him flexing and smiling wide down at him, the words Plus Ultra over his head. Again, it was a simple poster, but it was just what Izuku needed as he got up and clenched his fist with determination. Get stronger so you can be the hero you want to be, and enough to protect everything and everyone you'll come to love. Would be words that would carry Izuku on. After all, he had 10 long months to go, before it all would truly begin. Katsumi was concerned. Which was odd, really. She was hardly ever inflicted with doubt or worry, especially with her own actions, but she really couldn't help it now. She was long since gotten used to Izuku's heartbreak stages: depression, struggle with acceptance, moving on, happiness / normalcy, and new crush, only for the cycle to inevitably repeat just like the water cycle. It was sad, sure, but it was routine. Until now, that is. It was hard to explain it exactly, especially since she sat in front of Izuku for the majority of the day, but if she had to describe it, it would be something along the lines of, it felt like Izuku just skipped past the first 3 phases and just got back to the normalcy stage overnight. There was an invisible weight lifted off his shoulders, it seemed like, but there was also something else. Izuku looked like he was on edge about something, just a tad more jittery and thoughtful than usual, while still keeping upbeat and cheerful when he spoke. Therefore, it was probably more accurate to say a great weight was pulled off his shoulders, only to be replaced with a new one. Her lips pursed slightly as the teacher was rambling on about career planning or whatever. Anything that her teachers said that wasn't an assignment to breeze through was equivalent to the dramatic, bitchy rambling of 2 characters on those soap operas she knew her parents liked. Udade was a top-of-the-line school, a place that wouldn't accept anything less than the best of the best, so if she and Deku had to put up with this to prove it, they shall. Suddenly, she was snapped out of her train of thought as his teacher spun around and threw his sheets like confetti. But who am I kidding? You're all aiming for the hero course, right? He cheered, riling up the rest of the students to cheer and show off their quirks as if stretchy eyeballs and having a rock for a face were brag-worthy. Rolling her eyes as the teacher tried bringing them back down, Katsumi stepped onto her desk, deciding it was time to show up the rest of these extras that forgot their places in her origin story. Oh please, she roared, cracking her knuckles and flaring small explosions around her, grinning wide with her unusually sharp teeth. The only ones even worth enough of a damn to be heroes are me. She jabbed a thumb towards her chest proudly before pointing at Deku behind her. And Deku, just stay out of our way, she threatened as Izuku peeked from behind Katsumi. I am so sorry for her behavior, he muttered, bowing his head slightly as the rest of the class glared at the two. But thanks, Kachan, I'll be doing my best, promise. Katsumi huffed proudly and nodded. That's right, she barked, before dropping back down to her seat, kicking her legs up on the table as the teacher shook his head and just turned back to the board. Although, she didn't quite get what Deku had to apologize for. He knew she wasn't wrong. If these extras couldn't handle the truth, then maybe they actually should try and be heroes, see how far those wimps get before tapping out, assuming they don't die straight away. Katsumi snickered a bit at that thought, eyeing the clock to figure out how much longer she had to listen to the old man babble on about nothing. Thankfully for her, class was over within 2 hours, and while she was stuck in her thoughts it felt even quicker than that. As she got up, she couldn't help but notice how everyone around still snuck glares at the two and gossiped amongst themselves, although they were always much too scared to say anything to her face. Figures. She clicked her tongue and muttered extras under her breath. To her, they all just didn't know their places yet. Pitiful, really. Especially since they thought they would surpass her or Deku. Sure, he was quirkless, but just like her, he was much smarter, and 1,000 times more worthy than all of them. She turned to her smaller friend as he put his notebook into his backpack and hoisted it onto his shoulders. Then, Katsumi frowned a little. Being smart helped, yeah, but if only she could get him to bulk up or something, then they'd be in business. Deku tilted his head a little bit. Are you okay, Kachan? Katsumi blinked, then nodded before pointing down to Deku's midsection. Just thinking about how you spent all that time chasing girls instead of training, is all. She explained as he pouted, before flexing her bicep, which in turn made him blush slightly. Girls like guns like this, you know. You'll have a hard time getting girls and being a hero while you're so scrawny. Then, she turned to two girls who were leaving and flexed again, and they only scoffed in response before leaving. Well, you too. Kachan, he chastised, putting his hands firmly on his hips while attempting to reprimand her. What? She asked, starting to leave the room as Deku walked with her, explaining how it was bad to talk to people that way. Or, at least trying to, if Katsumi actually cared about that stuff. The conversation, but more like nagging to Katsumi, carried on until they reached the front gates, and Deku just turned and waved to her. Huh? Where are you going? And Deku just pointed his thumb behind him. I'm taking the long way home today. I just need some time to think, you know? There's just a lot on my mind. Girls, school, all that lame feelings junk, he explained with a small sigh and a barely kept up smile. Katsumi squinted a little bit, before slowly nodding. I mean okay, sure. She said, unnaturally quiet as her shoulders slumped just slightly. I'm going shopping, then see you around? Izuku nodded. I'll see you in a bit, I just need a minute to myself. He assured. Now Katsumi drew the only real logical conclusion she could. Wow, that Komi chick really ate him up, huh? And while normally she would just offer violence against someone's family or an awkward attempt at comfort, she just nodded again, knowing that the former would get shot down and the latter wouldn't do anything. Why yeah, I get it, but listen, Deku. Izuku perked up a bit. Just take care of yourself, okay? You worry me sometimes, she wanted to add but decided to leave it at that, watching as Izuku smiled a bit wider and gave her a thumbs up. Of course, thanks, Kachan. And you take care too, see you later. Katsumi smiled back. Thanks, Deku. She said, staying at the gate as Deku just turned and walked off, further and further away, not turning his back once. Katsumi sighed and took one last look, before walking off alone for the first time in years. Izuku lowered his head slightly in thought as he walked home. This way was more of quiet backroads than anything, so it was still and calm enough to really be alone with his thoughts. Which was a good or bad thing depending on one's perspective. Self-reflection, concentration, and planning were always a plus, but there was also nothing besides his own mental fortitude to stop himself from being drowned in doubt or fear. Still, the Buddha of Love's words rang true in his head. Granted, he was certainly a very unprofessional god, at least from that meeting. Then again, he never assured him he'd get into the hero course specifically, there was always the general or support courses. He shook his head just as he reached an underpass and sighed. A literal god told him not to give up, his family told him not to, his best friend told him not to, and All Might probably wouldn't either. He slapped his cheeks before gritting his teeth with determination. I'll be an incredible hero, damn it, he declared into the echo-filled underpass, as if to the entire world. And an amazing boyfriend to boot. Ah, good for you, kid. Izuku spun around and gasped, his heart stopping dead as he looked up to the green, writhing mass of sludge with huge, red eyes peering down on him, growing steadily as he crawled from the sewers. Izuku took one step back and tripped onto his ass just as the slime villain crawled out fully, his position only making him even more massive and even more indomitable as he crawled backward and away, his breath caught in his throat. Look, just be still for a moment, I gotta get this over with before he catches up with hey, where do you think you're going? He roared, lurching forward as Izuku scrambled to his feet and ran the other way. His massive, covering hand of sludge slammed onto his back and forced him down, knocking out his panicked breath from his lungs before he got reeled into the villain's sludge-like body as he kicked and fought wildly, until he was dragged straight into his mass, and the sludge villain surrounded him, going on about something Izuku didn't care about, instead pushing away as hard as he could but couldn't find a grip on him, like he was trying to climb out of an endless pit of sinking mud. He felt tears rushing down his face before he realized he was crying, but even then his thoughts were occupied with pleas for someone to help him, as the thoughts of his mom, Kastumi, Uncle Masaru, and Aunt Mitsuki flooded his mind, particularly Katsumi's, as he lingered on the last time he saw her, and the last things he said. "See you later," he repeated miserably and almost sarcastically to himself, even in his mind the words trembled with sadness and regret. His eyelids became heavy as his body became light, air had left him entirely, leaving his head feeling light and fuzzy as he slowly and finally closed his eyes. "Damn it, I'm sorry, everyone." Katsumi felt a shiver down her spine. She turned around and only saw the normal swarm of people walking about the market, nothing really of concern, and the weather didn't spontaneously change, so what was she looking for? She looked around more, scanning the area as the sinking feeling in her gut lingered. With a deep breath, she put a hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat before gritting her teeth slightly. She couldn't feel or see anything going on, so what was wrong? Was she being watched, or something wrong was going to happen? "Hey, Bakugo." Katsumi huffed slightly before turning to her little group, that is to say, a few extras from her class that latched onto her after they saw her at the market like lost dogs. If she had to give them anything, they were pretty adept at flattery, so at least they had something going for them. "What is it?" she demanded shortly. The lanky, black-haired student gulped slightly before smirking, trying to hide how much he shook as he did so. "Why don't we all head to a club or something?" he suggested, him and the second extra aiming down the street with their thumbs. Her brow furrowed slightly as she clicked her tongue. "You dumbass, I can't be caught in a place like that," she barked, making them flinch slightly as they gave meek apologies. Not only would that mess with her chances of getting into U.A, and not only would it get her parents to tell her off some more, but what would even be there for her? Drunk fools, choking cigar smoke, weirdos shooting their shot with the future number one, nothing she would willingly walk into. Again, she looked over the area, trying to figure out what exactly was setting her off right now. She had long since learned to trust her instincts, and she didn't want to regret not following them now. Especially since if something happened, she'd have her parents, Aunt Inko, and Deku crying all over her. The thought made her sigh slightly as her shoulders slumped a bit, the last interaction she had with Deku replaying in her mind again. "Stupid, stupid, 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 dense Deku," she growled, crossing her arms with a short huff. Izuku blinked blankly once, then twice before he tilted his head slightly. High again. The Buddha of Love, kneeling across from him from a small table, just waved. "Nice to see you again, Midoriya. So, have you thought about what I said?" They were seated on the clouds, with only the small table before them and a television set to the side. After a moment, Izuku just nodded. "Yeah, I'm trying to figure out exactly what to do, but I don't think that matters now," he said, his voice rapidly dropping to a whisper as he looked down. "Oh, Izuku. You aren't dead, but since you got knocked unconscious I decided to check up on you," he explained, making Izuku perk up again, relieved but still visibly down. "I am not? Oh, well that's a relief, that was pretty scary," he admitted as the old god nodded. Then, Izuku's eyes widened before he rounded onto him, slamming his hands onto the table. "Hey, why didn't you warn me about that?" he demanded as the Buddha choked. "You can see into the future, can't you?" The Buddha of Love threw his hands up and shook them as he defended himself. "And not really only things specifically to Love L like meeting your soulmates at U.A, but not really knowing any specifics. I promise, he shouted as Izuku huffed. Fine, but you know what? I was thinking about what you said, especially about me being an investment. Let me guess, you told the other gods that you didn't make a mistake with me, and even placed bets, right? He accused, but the old god's short gasp of horror told him all he needed to know. Give me a break, okay? Millions of years of working, and this was the first and only time I screwed up, he shouted back in his own defense as Izuku huffed and puffed out his cheeks angrily. But suddenly, the glaring match was interrupted as Izuku's knees and legs dropped into the clouds he was kneeling on, while the rest of him slowly sunk into it too. Wait, what? You're going back. The Buddha of Love informed him bluntly, craning his neck up and looking down as Izuku went down. But remember what I said, I'm counting on you, damn it. Izuku shot back up with a short gasp, a ready insult in his mouth before he blinked and realized he was seated on the gravel road, back on Earth, and more importantly far from the jaws or disgusting mud-like body of that villain. Oh yeah, he realized suddenly, how the heck did I? Whoa there, already up with a start, I see, a loud, jovial voice said behind him, relieved and happy. Good, I was starting to get worried there. The man ended it with a laugh before Izuku spun around to see exactly who it was. And lo and behold, All Might was right before him, throwing his head back and laughing heartily as Izuku felt feeling coming back to his legs as he shakily got back up. All Might? He exclaimed, taken aback and shocked enough that the last few minutes were practically shoved towards the back of his mind. In the flesh, young man, he said as Izuku sprang up fully, starting to stammer excitedly to himself, suddenly pulling out his notebook and trying to ask for an autograph, only to be taken aback by the full 2-page spread autograph, then bowed deeply over and over again. Thank you so much, All Might, sir, I'll treasure this forever and ever, he promised, before All Might laughed it off and waved dismissively, before sharply turning right and coughed into his fist, seeming to go entirely still in thought. Izuku never really had doubts in All Might after all these years of idolizing him, but the sudden pause as he stayed into his hand made him stop. Anyways, I've got to take this creep here down to the station, he declared, showing off a 2-liter bottle with the unconscious sludge villain trapped inside. Sorry I can't hang around, but duty calls, you know, stay out of trouble until then, young man. Wait, All Might, I need to ask why you something, he interrupted urgently as All Might squatted down, prepping his legs for a mighty leap. He grabbed onto the back on his shirt, trying to get his attention before he suddenly launched off the ground. The sudden force was so great Izuku felt like his arm was about to get torn from its socket before he grabbed on with his second hand, and clung on for dear life. The sudden jerk sent a bolt of pain through his arm, making his teeth grind together for just a moment before the sudden wave of air really hit him, like he was shot out of a cannon, and considering how fast All Might could move, he may as well have. Hey, he cried desperately, his entire body waving like a flag behind him. What the? All Might yelled, shaking his leg as Izuku screamed. Look kid, I love my fans, but this is way too much, let go. I'd die if I do, he shouted back, as All Might perked up suddenly in realization and redirected himself to a nearby rooftop. However, to neither of their knowledge, the bottle in All Might's pocket slipped free and began to fall in a wild spiral toward the city. Katsumi, still huffing to herself, just reclined back while the 2 extras before her, now weary and desperate, babbled on as they tried to find something that she would like: the arcade, a movie, karaoke, the mall, yada yada yada. Earlier she noticed from the way the second, more scraggly looking, one would count how much yen he was carrying. All these ideas required them to pay something, which probably meant they thought they could buy her favor because they too realized they had nothing to offer. It was almost amusing. Besides, all these ideas they were racking off were flawed for one major, fundamental reason: neither of them were Deku, and they should be grateful she'd even stop at all for these losers. Rolling her eyes, Katsumi hiked her backpack up and got off the wall as the other 2 stopped. Hey, what's up, Baku? Save it. She grunted whilst cracking her neck to the side, the sudden cracking making them flinch backward slightly. It started off cute, like a sad dog. She started, watching their pride shatter in real time, but now, I can't stand either of you, just step out of my way and save me the trouble. She demanded as the two parted to either side. She made it about 3 steps past them before the first one, the lanky guy with a creepy smile, spoke up again. Oh come on, Bakugo, don't be like that. Besides, what else is there to do? Hang out with Midoriya? He asked, ending with a small, almost hearty laugh as Katsumi stopped dead in her tracks. The first barely heard the second mutter out, "Oh," as Katsumi turned around, gritting her teeth. Exactly right, because unlike you ing creeps, she roared, drowning out the sound of a plastic bottle crashing behind her and suddenly popping open. Katsumi kept boring into them, and she got probably a single sentence in before they noticed the writhing, slowly growing green mass behind her that suddenly popped out a pair of disgusting, red eyes that stared right down at Katsumi. Their breaths hitched suddenly, and they both took a single step back before turning and bolting as fast as they could further down the alley before Katsumi stomped and yelled after them. And good ing riddance, she yelled, huffing slightly before turning around, and met with a wall of what she could only assume to be sewer sludge. The smell assaulted her nose, making her gag slightly before she looked up, stunned as the wall of sludge lurched over and seemed to beam with sick delight, before it dived down, spreading its gross body apart like a wide net. Katsumi had barely a second as she gasped, before grinding her teeth together and raising her arms high, placing her foot back as she braced herself and fired off the biggest explosion she could in that instant, getting a direct hit on its front as it cried out in pain. However, just as she was reeling from her attack, his bizarre, sludge hands had her by the wrists and molded around her hands thick, enough that even as she blasted again, it barely made past the surface before another gross tendril was around her waist, and with a sudden jerk that took the breath from her lungs, she planted front first into his writhing, disgusting mass. She could hardly tell what happened after that. She let loose explosion after explosion after explosion until her hands felt burnt and her arms ached, then redoubled her efforts. There was screaming, flames, and sirens soon enough, but she didn't care. She screamed and bucked and kicked and fired off as many explosions as she could, only hardly getting even the smallest wisps of air, and even that was enough to fuel her efforts for another minute or two of her restless, wild struggle for her life. Soon enough, she felt herself crying, from pain, panic, strain, or a combination of all of them, she couldn't really tell, but she still didn't care. All she wanted to do was fight harder against this disgusting being that was using her and her quirk to cause all this destruction. When she had her eyes open, she could faintly see pro heroes and people watching her in fear. For a moment, she imagined her parents seeing her like this, and the image for even a second caused a gut-wrenching feeling deep inside her. She knew she had to fight for them now, to fight for herself, for her dreams, for Aunt Inko and for Deku. Speaking of which, she could imagine him too, staring, wide-eyed and afraid, hands over his mouth in horror and crying just as she was. That was, until she blinked, and realized she wasn't imagining anything. He was there, in the back of the crowd, just as horrified as she was. Suddenly, she realized she was about to die like this. No one had come any closer, especially with the fires and explosions around, and she was about to be smothered by this bastard, all as Deku watched. Slowly, she clenched her eyes tighter as she made one final tug at his mass, finally bursting her face free for another moment. "Get thee off of me," she screamed, firing as hard as she could, only to be sunk back in the next instant. The next moment seemed to play in slow motion. She was facing the crowd again, but Deku was missing. She could probably have chalked it up to him not wanting to see her like this, but no, he had erupted from the front of the crowd and was sprinting, right at them. He moved faster than she had ever seen him before, dodging and sidestepping every obstacle and raging flame in the way, even while the heroes and crowd screamed at him to return, even spinning to the side a massive sludge hand that slammed against the ground with enough force to knock most people, even heroes, out cold. And with that spin, he took off his backpack and flung it as hard as he could, and it sailed over her head. Suddenly, the sludge monster screamed out in pain and reeled back, and his monstrous grip loosened, but she was still in utter shock, even as she kept struggling. Izuku was a mess, his clothes were dirty, his breath was ragged, every step was guided by instinct and panic, plus the flames around him visibly bored on him to the point where he may just drop out of exhaustion. To Katsumi, he looked like an angel. Before she knew it, he began clawing at the sludge monster's body, trying to dig her out as she pushed forward again and again, until her entire top half, sans her arms, were free. She panted loudly and coughed up a bit of green sludge as he kept going, getting her shoulders and hips loose. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft and ragged, and her face a mix of gratitude, confusion, and utter joy. "Why do this?" Suddenly, Izuku turned his head up. He was crying even harder than she was, but still smiling brightly, even if it quivered while sweat rolled down his face. "Are you serious, Kacchan?" he asked, suddenly wrapping both hands around her and tugging. "You're my best friend," he declared as he leaped backward, suddenly jerking her out as she gasped. "Of course I'd rescue you," he shouted, just as they hit the ground with a small thud. "You," the sludge monster thundered, reeling upward again as it stared down furiously. "You damn brat," he shouted, looking down at Izuku before looking down at them both and roaring again as he descended. Katsumi, who was hardly given a moment to actually remember to breathe deep and recover, could hardly raise her hand again to fire. Thankfully, as fate would have it, she wouldn't need to. That was because at that very moment, All Might had appeared and grabbed both hers and Izuku's wrists in his massive hand, yelled something about being the symbol of peace that Katsumi couldn't really make out, then let loose such a massive, destructive punch that she swore it caused a tornado right in front of her. The harsh winds whipped them both around harshly and seemed to vacuum the oxygen around them, making it hard to breathe. And for Katsumi, it was too much. Her vision was blurry as she blinked once, then twice as the world went dark, and the noise around her dimmed slowly. She was certain Deku yelled her name, but she didn't even have it in her to answer. Katsumi suddenly felt very small. It was hard to describe or tell why, but she felt utterly tiny. Suddenly, the darkness around her cracked in half and shone brightly. It hurt her eyes, so she rubbed them softly with the side of her fist with a small coup, before the brightness overwhelmed the darkness and opened to a whole new world. She recognized this place. It was bright, big, warm, and safe. She felt herself being carried forward, and with a small groan, she looked up and saw her mother carrying her in her arms. She was huge, but so were most people. Most of the people that held her like this had hands as big as her very head. Her mother smiled down at her softly, and she felt a warm, delightful reassurance. She was safe here, she now knew. Then, she was placed on the ground. It was soft and pretty frilly compared to the ground outside it that was brown and hard. She blinked in confusion, then looked up at her mother and father talking to another lady, with long, green hair that went down her back. She recognized this lady too, Auntie Inko. She was holding something small in her arms in the same way Katsumi was held in people's arm, but it was held tight in a small, blue blanket. She bounced up and yelled a little, not too angrily, but enough to get the big people's attention and let her see the blanket too. Auntie Inko giggled and said something to her parents before getting onto her knees, so the blanket-wrapped thing would be low enough for Katsumi to lean forward and see. It was a boy who was just a tad smaller than she was. Unlike anyone else she knew, he had little dots on his face, but green hair that was darker than Auntie Inko's. His eyes were closed, and his mouth slightly open as he breathed. Deciding to do the little one a favor, she reached for his cheek and began to wipe his face off, but was quickly frustrated that the dots wouldn't get off as the adults around her laughed at something Auntie Inko suggested. Suddenly, the boy pouted and blinked a few times, his emerald green eyes widening with each blink, before they rounded on Katsumi. She jolted as she sat back again, her body rocking and her eyes wide as she stared down at the boy who simply stared back, then giggled at her. Auntie Inko straightened her back and began to sit up, but Katsumi wouldn't have it. She pouted loudly and reached up while grabbing, crying out louder the farther she went, until she just complied and sat back down. Taking her chance, Katsumi put her arms around him and hugged as tight as her arms could hold while the adults awed down at them, and Izuku perked up with a small coo, wondering why this friendly little stranger was hugging him so suddenly. Katsumi, meanwhile, just put her head on him and hugged a little harder. She didn't know who this little green boy was, but he was hers now. Mine now, she thought with a huff, repeating it like a mantra. Mine now. Mine now. Mine now. Kachin Izuku called, shaking the girl as he propped her head up. Mine no, she drawled, turning her head with a small snore. Katsumi Bakugo, he shouted suddenly, and she shot up like a bolt, her eyes wide as her head shot around wildly. KH Mom? She shouted with worry, blinking rapidly as she slowly returned to Earth again, blinking rapidly to adjust her eyes to the light. No, sorry. Izuku pipped up, redirecting her attention towards him again. He tilted his head to the side a little with a small smile. He had long since wiped the tears from his eyes, although he was just as messy as before. Suddenly, she perked up again as she looked up again and really studied her surroundings, the aftermath of pure carnage, with the fronts of buildings shattered, burn marks and small craters from her explosions, and running water from what she assumed was the firefighters, but considering she, Izuku, and All Might were all covered in it, she really did have to wonder if a passing storm went while she was knocked out. Oh, right, All Might was there too, she just realized. But more importantly, Deku. She grabbed him by the collar and tugged him forward suddenly. What were you thinking, Deku? You almost died, damn it, she shouted, putting herself onto her knees instead of lying back. Izuku shrugged with a tired, beaten smile. Would you believe me if I said it was the second time today? Stunned, Katsumi's grip loosened and her eyes widened as she looked over him again, seeming to melt and shake with worry and fear. Izuku closed the distance again with a desperate bear hug, and instantly melted into her with a shaky, horrified sigh. I'm going to die before I let you go again. He declared, finally breaking down now that she couldn't see his face, and all she could do was hug him back and do the very same, the two of them breaking down into a fit of relieved, overwhelmed sobbing. Before long, the pair got to their feet again, and the entire time Katsumi held him tight to her side, hardly paying attention to anyone around them. Some hero asshole extra was yelling at Deku about something, while another was praising her, or something. Not that it mattered, she merely huffed as she brought him along in tow, lowering his head slightly in embarrassment as she led him down the road and past the crowd. Their walk passed in silence between the two as the sun began to set. There wasn't a lot they could say, or rather, not much that could be put into words. Their phones were probably blown up by their parents earlier, although it didn't matter now. They were together again, and togetherness meant safety. Izuku hissed a little bit in pain as Katsumi turned down toward him. By now, they were both on the final stretch to his mom's apartment and the sky was already bright orange and dimming slowly. What's wrong? And nothing, he stammered, before looking down at his arm. Why, you're just holding me a little tight, he explained, making her look down at his arm that looked like she was about to snap it clean in two, and with a wince she pulled away, looking away with clear embarrassment and a deep blush on her face. My bad, she apologized softly before clearing her throat as Izuku rubbed his arm, smiling a little. She rarely apologized for much, so even shy ones like those were monumental. Don't worry about it, really, he said, giving his arm a small shake as they walked past an alley that All Might was peeking behind. Hoping to catch the young man alone, he couldn't help but feel a little let down, as cute as the scene before him was. He kept his distance but still followed, seeing when they might diverge, only to be met with the blonde girl, Kaa-chan, he recalled, asking to sleep over, and he happily agreed. Frowning slightly, All Might dropped his form, returning back to his smaller, lanky true self, fully determined to talk to this young man once again. Finally, after a few more minutes of walking, they approached an apartment building, and Toshinori knew he had to act, now quickly snapping a pebble and getting behind a building. He took aim and threw it hard, landing on his shoulder on the opposite side. Kacchan was walking by. Izuku perked up and turned his head back curiously before his eyes widened in realization and he stiffened, quickly drawing her attention as well while Toshinori took cover again. Kacchan, can you please head in?" "What? Why?" "Oh, and nothing important. I promise it'll only take a minute." Toshinori sighed deeply in relief, then hissed in pain while holding his side. He heard her huff and grumble something before storming off, then finally the young man walked around the side of the building. "All Might?" Toshinori nodded down at him. "Hey kid, Midoriya, right? I wanted to talk to you about something urgent," he explained, before jabbing his thumb past the wall. "But first, is that Kacchan girl inside?" Izuku's eyes narrowed for a split second, to a point where he looked even a little upset before looking for him. "Yeah, she's gone, but her name's Bakugo Katsumi, so you should just call her Bakugo." "Ah, I see." Toshinori sighed again before getting off the wall. "Now, first of all, I'd like to thank you so very much," he said, making Izuku look up with wonder and confusion. "Really?" he asked as Toshinori nodded, crossing his arms. "Exactly. If we hadn't talked before that accident with young Bakugo, then I wouldn't have been able to fully grasp what I saw: a small, quirkless child, and brave, desperate to protect his best friend, despite the impossible odds," he explained while Izuku gave a dry chuckle and rubbed the back of his head. "Well, thanks, but it wasn't really bravery. It's hard to explain really, but—" "You didn't really mean to, did you?" he interrupted, as Izuku looked up with realization. "Your legs moved all on their own, you moved to protect the innocent before you could even stop to think about it. If anything, the only thing you really thought about was how to throw your backpack that well, right?" Izuku nodded rapidly. "Why yes, exactly," and Toshinori just smirked. Of all the greatest heroes, no matter how different, unique, experienced, or whatever, they all do exactly as you did, protect the innocent no matter the cost, even in their youth when they're inexperienced or weak," he explained, watching as Izuku's eyes twinkled. "But what does all of this mean, All Might?" he asked, his voice trembling softly as Toshinori straightened his back. "It means, young man, that there is incredible promise in you. You see, there are plenty of theories about my quirk. I get asked all the time too, but I tend to shake it off with a laugh. But in truth," he gestured in a grand, extravagant manner that may have looked better in his buff form, but worked just fine to stoke the wonder in Izuku. "My power has been passed on from generation to generation, and its name is one for all," he declared as Izuku's breath hitched, taken aback as he shook slightly on his feet. "And for as long as I've had it, it's high time I took on a successor, a great hero for the next generation. And secondly," he continued, lowering his tone slightly, soft with gentleness and regret, "I'd like to apologize, and change my answer from before. Yes, Midoriya, you can become a hero. All you have to do is accept." Izuku sniffled, his body quivering as he reeled back slightly. Mentally, he could have prepared for this, with the Buddha's sort of affirmation, and the support from those closest to him, and now, with All Might himself, who was probably his greatest inspiration for becoming a hero, Izuku felt a sudden, uplifting surge inside him. Now, the path was so much clearer. Steadying himself, Izuku nodded while wiping tears from his eyes. I accept," he declared, while All Might grinned. "Haha, I thought so. Look, I've held up enough time by now. I'm sure your family and young Bakugo are worried by now. Do you know of Takoba Beach?" Izuku nodded excitedly, lighting up at the idea of the beginning of his true hero training. "Good, meet me there at 6 in the morning, sharp. We can begin then. For now, rest up, young Midoriya," he ordered with a small nod as Izuku nodded back in understanding. Yes sir. Oh, and thank you so much again, All Might," he said, his voice trembling again as he bowed deep, but he simply waved it off. You're very welcome, but run along now, seriously. This probably looks really weird, and I don't want to know what young Bakugo is capable of if I keep you any longer and make her mad. You really don't. He confirmed, hiking up his backpack again. 6 a.m. sharp, right? Exactly, and don't tell anyone about this. This all for one business isn't for just anyone to know. And with that, they both said their goodbyes, and were off. Inside, Izuku got a single foot past the entrance before his mom tackled him with a bear hug from the front, facing him to take a step back and keel over a little before Katsumi did the same to his side, getting him onto one leg as he tried to recover and breathe through the double crushing. Groaning slightly with pain mixed with the sounds of his mom sobbing and talking about how worried she was and how overjoyed she is, Izuku finally managed to put one arm around them both and hug them. That night and the following morning marked the next 10 grueling months of Izuku's life, daily training on training, whether that be cleaning the trash from Takoba Beach, sprinting, or carrying All Might in his buff form on his back. He took it all in stride. Even outside his daily regimen All Might gave him, he forced himself to take on more, on his own time or at school at the cost of sleep and studying. He even asked Katsumi to box with him just so he'd have actual fighting experience. Granted, she loved that he was taking it seriously and that he wasn't getting sidetracked with any romantic interests anymore, but even Katsumi saw how much he was wearing himself down. However, between her appreciation for his renewed dedication and the complete lack of the ability to talk about feelings, she more or less stayed out of the way. Thankfully, she didn't need to, because around summer, roughly 5 months after training began, Izuku and All Might were out for a run, and he collapsed entirely. "Hey now, what's the matter?" All Might asked, hopping off his scooter and squatting down near Izuku as he wearily lifted his head. "And nothing's the matter," he croaked, shakily trying to push himself up, before All Might went into his buff form and lifted him by the collar. "Oh, I see the problem here, young Midoriya. You haven't been following the American Dream Plan, have you? If I had to guess, you've been doing a good deal more than you can handle." Izuku just groaned miserably in response. "When I put together that plan for you, it was taking your body's condition as its main consideration. Going above it would only be abusing your body," he explained, placing him back onto his shaky legs. I know, but everyone else has had their quirks since they were 4, like Kacchan, and they've all been working super hard to make it to you. I have to work 3 times as hard just to keep pace," he explained with a deep breath, bringing his fists up with a determination that was hardly deterred by exhaustion. After a moment, All Might laughed and slapped Midoriya on the back, making his entire body rock. "Haha, there's that fire. I understand exactly how you feel, young Midoriya, so fine, leave it to me. I'll readjust your plan, and have you ready for you in no time flat," he promised, ending with another hearty laugh. And from then on, Izuku stuck to the plan in full. Finally, the 10 months were up and they had arrived in fall, and it was the morning of the entrance exams. Katsumi, confident as always, slept easy the previous night to the thoughts of her and Deku acing the exams, getting top of their classes, and instantly being top heroes. Oh yes, everything was going perfectly. She woke up extra early to get some practice in and hype herself up for the day, and was finally off to make sure Deku did the same too. Or she planned to, until her dad stopped her right at the door. "Hold on a minute, Katsumi." She groaned and turned to her father, her hand still on the doorknob. "Yeah, what?" He only smiled back, thinking fondly of Mitsuki for a moment. "You've got this. You and Izuku both, I believe in you, but please look out for each other if you can." Katsumi's snarl softened significantly, merely turning back towards the door. "Of course we've got this, who do you think we are?" "But, thanks, Dad," she said, before leaving. Masaru sighed deeply as she left, before getting up to get ready for work. "I think that's the nicest thing she said since," he pondered to himself before chuckling. "Ever." Outside, Katsumi was trying to see if Deku was up by texting him, but quickly realized he was probably still asleep since they stayed on scent. She frowned a little deeper, knowing that the entry was only a few precious hours away since when was Deku a sloth. No, it was more likely he stayed up late for one reason or the other, like studying or fretting about whether or not he'd pass. Katsumi arrived at Midoriya's apartment and knocked while shaking her head. A few moments later, a very tired Inko peered through. "Oh, Katsumi, good morning, dear." "Morning, Auntie. Is Deku inside still?" Inko shook her head with a small laugh. "Oh no, he's out training before the exam at Takoba Beach, I think. But honestly, the morning of exams? He should be resting up, haha." Inko sighed and leaned against the doorframe, staying silent for a moment before giving a soft, but slightly forced smile. "I love my boy, Katsumi, but he worries me with just how far he's willing to go, sometimes. Talk just a bit of sense into him, won't you? I don't want either of you working yourselves into the ground," she asked, patting Katsumi on the shoulder. Katsumi nodded and turned to leave again. "Of course, and thanks for the heads up, Auntie." "No problem, dear." And good luck, she wished, before retiring back into the living room. Once outside, Katsumi grumbled to herself as she walked and kicked aside rocks at dangerously high velocity. In Takoba? That dump of a beach is where he's been training this whole time? It's filthy. It took a little bit longer than she'd like, but she finally approached. The first thing she noticed, or rather first two things, Takoba was nearly spotless, an entirely pristine beach of golden sands and ocean that glowed beautifully in the sunrise. And second, a freaking gigantic mountain of garbage off to the side. Judging from how much was there, and how bad it looked before, it looked like All Might swooped down and made that giant pile. The hell? Next, as she walked over, she noticed something very peculiar near the base of it. A man, thin, middle-aged, and lanky as hell with dirty and wild blonde hair. Next to him was Deku, who was visibly gagging on something he just ate. "Oh, Deku," she shouted, making both the old man and Deku jump suddenly and turn towards her. It was also at that moment that she noticed something else, and that was that Deku didn't have a shirt on, at all. He was always fond of long-sleeved shirts, hoodies, and jackets. Even his hero suit was supposed to be full arm length, so she was never used to seeing any part of him really bare. All of this to say, that Izuku never once hinted at how shredded he got recently. Sure, he had been filling out his clothes a bit more, but she thought it was more of a growth spurt, not all of that. Geez, she could grind meat on abs like those. Quickly shaking her head, she jumped the railing and landed on the sand as the two before her looked spooked to see her. "Deku, the exams are getting close, and who's this old man?" Flustered, the old man patted Izuku's back. Oh, me? I'm no one, really, just young Midoriya's personal trainer, you see." Katsumi's brow furrowed at Izuku, who quickly nodded. "Why, yeah, he's been helping me train for a while now, since the sludge villain accident, I mean." She answered, clearly not even looking at Izuku's face. "Fine, but we'd better leave now if we're going to make it." "She's right, you know. You two need to head off, and good luck, you two." He wished with a small nod, as Izuku scrambled to get on his shoes, top and uniform shirt over it, to which Katsumi groaned at something, but he couldn't tell what. And finally hiked on his backpack. "All right, I'm ready. Oh, and sir?" He turned towards the man again and bowed deeply. Thank you so much for everything you did for me." The old man laughed it off with a "You're welcome, young Midoriya," and Katsumi raised an eyebrow at the display. "Stop your brown nosing and let's go." He jumped up at the yell and began to run after Katsumi, who already dashed up the stairs. Wait up for me," he shouted, before turning to wave goodbye one last time to the old man at the beach, then chasing Katsumi up the stairs and through the streets. A couple of hours, and a quick meal later, Katsumi and Izuku finally stood together before the gates at U.A., the golden title glowing magnificently. Both stood proud, with Katsumi grinning wide and snickering to herself. "This is where it really begins, Deku," she declared, while Izuku nodded. Izuku had his fists clenched to his side as they shook nervously, looking around himself. Why yeah, this is it, Kachin," he said, knowing that while they both meant the beginning of their hero careers, the words of the old Buddha of love rang again in his head. He sighed before taking one deep breath. "Let's go," he said, making Katsumi smirk as they walked together. Even the first step past the gate felt monumental. This was a place that churned out the greatest heroes in the country, including All Might himself, and, if he hadn't messed with the timeline or whatever, it was the start of his great high school romance. At that exact moment, Izuku tripped over a stone and began to fall face first into the ground. He didn't even try to protect himself, he just suddenly accepted his fate and decided to die. Except, the impact never actually came. Instead, he just floated in the air, not a single part of him touching the ground. He looked to his side and saw Katsumi half reaching for him, but she definitely wasn't doing whatever this was. Then, she looked up and past Deku, to his other side. Looking over, he couldn't really help but gasp slightly at the girl before him. She was incredibly pretty, with a warm smile, rosy cheeks, and short brown hair with bangs framing her cute face. "Sorry about using my quirk on you, but I figured you wouldn't mind if I stopped you from bashing your face on the first day, right?" she asked with a giggle, pressing all 10 of her fingers together and dropping him back onto his feet. Then, the girl turned her head upward to speak but stopped dead when they met eyes. Because just at that moment, it was exactly as the god of love forecasted. A sudden, instantaneous shock rang through them both the moment they met eyes. Instead of speaking, her voice halted into a small squeak like she was trying to force it through, but couldn't. They were both there so long, Katsumi suddenly swatted him on the back. Granted, her fuse was so short that so long was actually about 2 or 3 seconds. "Earth to Deku, do you read?" Whining, Izuku rubbed his back. "Deku? That's a cute name," the girl said, drawing his attention again. "HM? Oh, Deku is just a name Kachin here's been calling me since we were little. My name's Izuku Midoriya, it's so nice to meet you," he said, unable to rid the smile off his face. "It is? I thought it sounded like Dikairu, or, you can do it. So I like it," she said cheerfully, making him blush as he felt another shock go through him. "Oh really? I never thought about it like that. Okay, you can call me that too," then he declared with a small laugh. Katsumi, meanwhile, furrowed her brows. Instead of seething rage, she just felt confused. Sure, she was a little annoyed, but there was something off about her. "I'm Ochako Uraraka, it's nice to meet you, Deku." Like that, Katsumi jumped slightly as Deku laughed softly and shook her hand, with her offering her hand first. Something wasn't right here. Girls weren't supposed to be into him. 100 girls by now, and not one of them even considered him for a second, and it was supposed to stay like that. Damn it, she was talking cute and sweet to him, and even from behind he could tell he was blushing just as hard as she was. "Oh my god, that's a 13 sash, isn't it?" he asked, leaning in slightly towards her scarf, acknowledging a small sash onto the end that looked like the hero 13's head. "Yeah, it is. Wait, you know who 13 is?" "Most people just look at me funny when I say who she is," she asked, almost bouncing on her heels from excitement. She's amazing. Her black hole quirk was pretty much designed for rescue-based hero work." "Oh, did you hear that she's a teacher here?" he asked, just as giddy as she was. "I know, right? It can take out tons and tons of rubble or debris, which is the work of an entire rescue crew with construction-level equipment, in the span of a few seconds, and nothing left over," she gushed, looking just as happy to have found a kindred spirit as she did having met a fellow 13 fan. Now infuriated, Katsumi grabbed Deku by the collar of his shirt and pulled him along toward the door. "Alright, enough, let's go before they leave us behind," she demanded, now dragging him like luggage. Wade Ochako jogged over, then leaned down to talk to him. Which course are you going for, Deku? We're going for the hero course, so step out of the way, round-faced Katsumi barked, making Ochako frown. Oh well, so am I, so, with any luck. Katsumi growled. And stomped away faster, now choking him out as he struggled in her iron grip. By the time they made it into the first half, the written exam, Izuku was back on his feet. While under normal circumstances he would have reprimanded her behavior, especially on their first day on campus, he was simply glowing with delight. So Uraraka was one of my soulmates? She's so cute, and we clicked as well as Kachin and I did. Damn, I should have asked for her number. He was so enraptured by his thoughts, that even when they took the test and made it into the auditorium he nearly squirmed in his seat with delight, hardly able to pay attention to the presentation President Mike was giving. He was so far gone, he barely geeked out from seeing the hero in person, a fact Katsumi caught on to quickly and was very bitter about. On top of that, they learned how they were going to be divided into groups, and being seated directly next to each other, they were put into different testing areas. By then, Katsumi was outright growling as she clawed into her armrest, just about cracking them both into splinters before Izuku coaxed her into calming down. Soon enough, the pair had to split up again, giving each other one last wish of luck before parting on to separate buses towards the mock city exam areas. The enemies they were all told of seemed formidable, and Izuku only had some experience fighting from Katsumi, where he just spent most of the time being beaten into a paste. He slouched back and sighed deeply, deep in thought. One for all needed him to digest the hair he swallowed earlier, and while the thought made him shudder with disgust, he was still very anxious. He didn't know how to handle it, he didn't even know if his body could, but he damn well had to try. Before he knew it, the bus came to a stop and all the applicants began to file out into the lot outside. Breathing deep to calm his nerves, he stepped outside too and began to look around, more than a little nervous. The people here looked strong, and most of them had some kind of item like a belt, weapon, or accessory of sorts. Quickly, he had to slap himself lightly across the face, reigniting the determination within himself. Of course they all look strong, he told himself, they all trained so hard for this day, just like I did. Huffing, he looked forward and saw Uraraka again, doing some stretches in preparation. You Uraraka. Suddenly, she turned around and instantly lit up while her cheeks blushed a bit more prominently, then turned to walk over. Deku, wow, this is awesome, she cheered, instantly propping herself up at his side, making him clam up quickly and blush brighter as well, his smile shaking awkwardly from his own timidness. Why yeah, anyway, I just wanted to wish you good luck on your exam. I'll be trying my best too, he said, rubbing the back of his head slightly while Uraraka smiled a bit brighter. I hope you would. Wouldn't be nice if we had the same class? She asked, looking a bit dreamy-eyed as she said it. Yeah, that sounds nice. Izuku inhaled sharply, his eyes wide and his face even redder as she practically fanaticized out loud. That was until President Mick's voice boomed over the blares above. Alright, all you groovy hero hopefuls, he shouted, instantly making Uraraka and Izuku jump up in surprise. Good luck, Deku. Thanks, you get movin', President Mike declared as the gates shot open suddenly, and the flood of applicants poured in, with one noticeable blue and tall blur at the front. Everyone moved so fast, Izuku was even left behind, and it was while he was charging down the street he suddenly roared in frustration and slapped himself again. I forgot to ask for her number. Meanwhile, across the campus, Katsumi already jetted through the sky and landed on some poor two-pointer bot with a dropkick, using it like a board and crumbling it to bits under her feet. Katsumi knew one thing for sure: how to rage. In particular, how to aim that rage toward her goals and use it as jet fuel to reach and shatter those goals. And right now, she had enough to own this stupid exam 100 times over. Stupid ing, she swung to her right, slamming her hand into the guts of a one-pointer and blowing it to bits. Round face. She dashed forward with both hands behind her as two more one-pointers closed in on her, and she swung both arms out for a conjoined blast that tore them and the ground apart with enough force to set herself back slightly. She tore off her jacket and cast it aside, leaving her in her black tank top, nothing protective, but it allowed for the most mobility and speed, just as she liked it. "Who do you think you are?" she roared, slaughtering a three-pointer and snarling at the extra who dared complain that she stole their kill. "It would be yours if you weren't dogshit." She ran again in search for a bigger fight, coming across a small squadron of 4 two-pointers that tried to encircle her. "Dense ing Deku, stay out of my way," she cried as she swung wide from low to high like an uppercut with another explosion, sending the first spiraling through the air. The next two went to her sides and she just held her arms out and fired again, then aimed behind her to fire again, sending her flying forward and above the tin can that tried backing up, but she stopped it with a mighty stomp that snuffed it out. Panting, she threw her head up and roared wordlessly like a wild beast. "Yeah," a voice roared behind her. She snapped her head back while gritting her teeth. There was a girl who held a three-pointer in a headlock, bashing its face in with her fist that appeared to be made of stone. She had wild, red hair pointed up with matching eyes, incredibly sharp teeth, and a scar on her eye. Like Katsumi, she had on a black tank top too, showing off just how impressively built she was, and using that strength to batter that robot. "Wreck 'em, girl," the cheerful redhead rooted, finally tearing off the three-pointer's head. "Shut up," she roared back, before blasting off to slaughter more robots. Unfortunately, Izuku had no such luck with harvesting points. In fact, he couldn't collect even one so far. He had to get saved by someone who shot a laser from their belt, too. So naturally, it came the time when he got really anxious, running frantically to get just one bot. However, it was only made worse soon enough. He ran by Uraraka, and heard her say, "Alright, that should be 34," and when he listened to others around him, he realized just how grave his situation was. The exam worked off of places, meaning that if he was this far behind now. A deep, cutting feeling found a home in Izuku, seeming to freeze his insides and turn them bitter. I can't believe this," he gasped, clenching his fists as he ran. "All of that time, all that training with all Might and Kachin, is it gonna all go to waste?" he said in despair, clenching his fists even harder. Minutes passed them by, minutes of Izuku sprinting with growing desperation, and Katsumi raising her body count. Until finally, with only a few precious minutes left, the zero-pointer was unleashed, and holy cow, was he not prepared for this. The thing felt like it was causing an earthquake as it rolled towards them and the city, towering over the buildings that were only really shoulder or neck height in comparison. In shock, Izuku fell back and on his ass as he could only stare up in awe. Everyone ahead of him had already long since bolted, and he got up to do the same until he heard Uraraka again. "Oh ow." Snapping to attention, he suddenly turned back and saw Uraraka with her legs pinned beneath the rubble that the zero-pointer had dropped on her, trying to crawl from beneath it as the titanic robot kept moving forward. This feeling was natural, but still not very familiar to him. Izuku sprinted towards her and the robot without a single thought, his only concern being to help his new friend and newly found soulmate. He didn't care about his points, he didn't care that it wasn't worth any, he simply moved. Suddenly, he felt a deep surge inside him as he ran, distracting him for just a moment as he realized that it was happening. One for all was ready. He crouched down for a moment, feeling its power concentrate in his legs right as he leaped, firing him through the air as if from a cannon. In the blink of an eye, he was eye level with the massive zero-pointer, which had begun to swing its massive arms around to grab him. Gritting his teeth, Izuku reeled his arm back, feeling the fabric of his jacket literally burst off from the power right under his skin. Smash, he roared, swinging and hitting the zero-pointer right in the middle of its 6 robotic eyes, catering its face and sending the back, and like a great massive statue, fell back and collapsed. For a moment, Izuku was simply suspended in the air, recovering from the feeling of adrenaline that drove him to just punch out a skyscraper-sized robot. And for that moment, he looked on with astonishment and a very unfamiliar sense of pride. However, that moment wouldn't last, as he suddenly began to descend with a yelp of surprise and fear. Then, the second round of shitty, sudden realizations hit him. His legs and arm were broken, his entire arm turned an ugly, bruised, and twisted purple as it failed helplessly as his legs did. He couldn't afford to think about it now, as he just kept falling and gaining momentum, and with only one arm left, he found himself with only one option: he was going to punch again, and break his fall before he went splat. Damn it. Then I won't be able to get any points, then I'll be done for. Suddenly, he was literally slapped out of his thoughts and back into reality. His mind lagged behind for a moment as he stayed suspended in the air for a moment, then lit up with realization as he looked to his side and saw Uraraka, levitating on a chunk of one of the defeated robots to reach him and break his fall. Then, she touched her fingers together again and dropped them both, letting him flop onto the ground with a groan while she turned to the side and began to vomit over the side. Shock and exhaustion were wringing them both as some of the other examinees surrounded the area, talking amongst themselves. Finally, Izuku pushed himself up with one arm and began to drag himself forward, his face contorted with pain as Ochako turned to watch, both with awe and horror at the display. Just 1 point, at least. He grunted, pushing himself forward before a horn suddenly blared, drowning out the noise around them. "Alright, examinees, time's up," he declared, making Izuku freeze up with shock and despair, face planting into the ground. He brought up his uninjured arm, clenched his fist, and punched the ground with a frustrated cry. Ochako, slumping miserably, pushed herself onto her feet, clenching her stomach and walking on wobbly legs, plus the injury to her right leg, barely made it over before getting onto her knees and patting him on the back with her pinky carefully lifted. There, there," she said hopefully, her gut sinking both from the sight before her, and the thought that this kind, sweet boy wouldn't make it with her, assuming she made it too, as well. Frowning, she wondered if she could help him out somehow. Not in her condition, but if she could only give him a few of her points, maybe. After defeating the 0-pointer after seeing her injured, it felt like the least she could do. Suddenly, the realization hit her full force. He turned, saw she was injured, and without a moment's hesitation, sacrificed himself to destroy the 0-pointer, and all for a girl he just met. If she weren't so nauseous, she would have swooned off her feet. Deku, she whispered, before smiling softly and patting his back again comfortingly. "You're a really great guy, aren't you?" She cooed softly, taking one hand to his wild, green hair and petting it affectionately. "Don't worry about him, dearie," a withered, elderly voice called, making Ochako look up and see a small, elder lady with a needle-shaped cane walking over. "I'll take care of everything." Izuku groggily lifted his head and squinted a little. "Our recovery girl?" he croaked, propping himself up with his uninjured arm again. Ochako clicked her tongue. "Deku, don't waste any of your energy," she chastised, before groaning slightly in pain herself, and falling back with exhaustion. "Oh my," recovery girl said as she dug in her pockets and pulled out a handful of colorful gummies. "Here, young lady, take some vitamins, that red one there should help with your stomach issues too," she said as Ochako happily took them and began chewing quickly. "And for you, young man, boy, you sure did a number on yourself," she said, before her lips suddenly began to expand, and she kissed him right on the wrist. "There, now, let's get you to the resting area." 2 small robots rolled up behind her with a stretcher and reclined Izuku into it as he groaned miserably, and just before they began to roll off, he raised his hand. Wait, Uraraka." He weakly lifted his head with a small smile. I never asked for your number." After a moment, Uraraka giggled and heaved onto her feet, walking alongside the stretcher as the robots began rolling away. "For sure." And while the two were guided to the rest area to make sure Izuku got a full recovery, Katsumi was proudly standing atop the smoking remains of her area's 0-pointer. A sadistic smirk spread across her face, her eyes glowing with delight. Who, she sighed, kicking aside a piece of it from her feet. The poor thing didn't stand a chance, really. She was still more than filled with rage when it showed up, and the thing's very existence was a challenge, and there wasn't a single challenge she wouldn't rise to. Besides, it wasn't about the points with that one, it was about proving to everyone here, including all the teachers watching, that Katsumi Bakugo was here to take first place, in this exam, in U.A, and the hero world next. She proudly hopped off, strutting past all the gawking extras and remains of broken robots towards the entrance again. Damn, it felt good to be number one. Katsumi snickered to herself, wondering how Deku would react to seeing her proudly present some kind of token or award for getting so much done. Knowing her, he probably wouldn't be surprised to see her with yet another trophy, but wouldn't it be nice to get praised? The thought made her feel odd inside. She knew it would make her pleased with herself, but there was also another level to it besides just base pride. Something about Deku being proud of her made it seem all the more rewarding. She felt squeamish at the thought, every inch of her body alight with energy. Quickly, she just shook these thoughts from her head. No matter how good it would feel, mushy crap like that had to wait for now. She just had to wait for them both to get accepted, but if they were smart, someone would just come running out, get into Dejiza, and beg her to join right away. During the bus ride back, she managed to wipe herself clean of sweat, oil, and ash, then had a moment to freshen up before jumping out, expecting to find Izuku right as he came out his bus, but frowned when she discovered no such luck. Growling and whipping out her phone, she quickly called him up, tapping her foot against the concrete impatiently. On the second ring he picked up, "Kaken? Hey, what's up, how did you do?" "Hey Deku, and I aced it obviously. I even beat the crap out of the 0-pointer, but never mind, that the hell are you at?" He laughed nervously over the other side of the phone. "I'm not surprised. Well, I kinda got hurt, but don't worry, I'm in a rester right now, I should be let out soon." "Hurt?" she shouted, stomping her foot and growling. "How?" She couldn't see him, but she could almost feel how he physically recoiled from the phone. I took on the 0-pointer too, but I just got a little injured." "A little?" Uraraka interjected as Katsumi clenched her phone harder. "Deku, both your legs and your arm was broken after that." Suddenly, all of Katsumi's rage was sapped away, her knees felt weak as that information hit her, and she grasped her phone with both hands. "Be both legs." "Your arm?" she shouted, worry clear in her voice now. "Kachen, it's okay, recovery girl's here and she healed me up, plus, Uraraka's keeping me company. You remember her from this morning, right? I know you're not great with names, but..." She shook her head to clear it. "Who, round face?" she demanded, the sinking and burning feeling in her guts returning again, knowing that she was there for him when he was injured, instead of her. Yeah, her. Anyway, after I get out, I'll text you. Uraraka needs to get to the station, so we can walk her there, then go home," he said, his tone suddenly dropping miserably. Granted, she couldn't tell why he'd be more depressed about the aspect of going home rather than being injured, but she only guessed it had something to do with round face. Then, the flames were only stoked as she heard Uraraka gently talking to him. "Deku, did something else happen to you?" She heard him gulp nervously, even if he tried to hide it. Kachen, will you promise not to get angry?" And that pretty much cemented it in her mind, he was doing something over there with round face, something that he knew she'd blow them both to bits over. "Yes." She growled, "I promise not to get angry unless you tell me that you're going into an agency together or some shit. That's supposed to be our thing, damn it." "What?" But I never agreed to." "Look, Kachen, we couldn't be in an agency together." He took a second to sniffle miserably, his voice shaking slightly now. "I didn't get a single point, I'm sorry." Izuku sighed miserably as Katsumi went silent, bracing himself for her yelling, or saying she was disappointed, or anything, but she just went silent. He only imagined she wanted to, or was trying to come up with the right thing she wanted to say, but there was nothing. "Oh look, recovery girl is back, I'll meet you at the gate later, goodbye, Kachan." He stayed on the line for a few moments longer to the sound of silence, before finally hanging up. Roughly 20 minutes later, Ochako and Izuku both finally arrived at the front gate together. To the side, Katsumi was reclining against the wall, visibly slumping and more defeated than Izuku had ever seen her. Hey, Kachan." She sighed and turned to them only slightly in response, barely even acknowledging Ochako. "Hey, Deku." Clearing his throat, Izuku looked down, ashamed. "Kachan, I really don't worry about it." He shot his head up at Katsumi, whose face suggested she was just neutral to this. "If we can't be heroes, you can still work with me, or something, right?" she asked with a small sigh, turning to look up at the sky. "You keep those hero notebooks, they could be useful if I ever fight someone I can't get a read on, so don't stress about it, okay?" she said, clearly as downcast as he was. "Well, sure, but Kachan, it's not just about us being heroes together. I wanted to be a hero too, like All Might, who always saved the day with a smile. I'm sorry if it sounds greedy, but I wanted to be a hero for myself, too." Suddenly, Ochako hugged his arm from behind, causing him to look back in surprise as she smiled cheerfully. "That's not greedy at all. This would be a really crappy world if wanting to help people was considered wrong, you know. Besides, they should let you in anyway. You destroyed that zero-pointer just to help me out. An academy that trains any real heroes should recruit those who go out of their way to help others." "Wait, destroyed it?" Katsumi demanded, slack-jawed and stunned by this information. Ochako giggled and nodded. He jumped up and socked that thing square in the face. "Just trashed it," she said, patting him proudly. "If I'm being honest, I think that cemented things, for me." Drawn out of her curiosity for just a moment, Katsumi turned to Ochako as Izuku tilted his head slightly. "Cemented things? The hell does that mean?" Yeah, Uraraka, what's that supposed to mean?" To which Ochako giggled again, her cheeks getting even redder. "You took on that thing for me when no one else would even come back to help me out. You're sweet, smart, and attentive, cute and be-built," she said, looking down at the arm she was attached so tightly to. "Deku, I think that I'm in love with you." Izuku gasped as Katsumi began to tremble, staring wide-eyed at the scene before her. And no, she thought, a chill piercing through her. This isn't right. Izuku's hand went to Ochako's shoulder as she looked up hopefully. He smiled so softly, it was like an angel's. "Ochako, you've been nothing but sweet and kind to me, even when you didn't have to. You're a great girl." This isn't supposed to happen." Katsumi began to pant slightly, her chest heavy and cold. The agency we were supposed to. "Ochako, I love you." "No." Izuku and Ochako jumped suddenly as Katsumi roared, then turned to her, only to be left stunned at the sight. Katsumi was crying, her teeth gritting and her eyes wild. She left the wall and was crouched slightly like she was going to fight, but if her trembling was anything to go by, it was either that or her collapsing. No, you're not, why you can't," she screamed, stomping forward once as her anger visibly dropped and was replaced with strife. "He's mine. Girls never liked him before. This isn't right." Her hands came around her head and squeezed. We're supposed to, but why you can't take him from me," she accused, and at that moment Izuku closed the distance, hugging Katsumi close to his chest with his head on hers. He's supposed to be mine." Men tend to fall in love over time, and even when they meet their soulmates they probably won't know it, while women tend to fall in love at first sight. Izuku's eyes widened as the Buddha of Love's voice echoed in his mind, and he subconsciously held Katsumi tighter. Suddenly, he realized that since they were children when they met, far before the god of love came into his life, she had already fell for him and he failed to notice this entire time. I'm a fool, aren't I?" he asked, while Katsumi sniffled. I can't believe I was so blind to how you felt, Kachan. He stroked her upper back slowly as his friend bawled, but slowly calmed down. Hey, Kachan, Ochako. I think we all need to talk. There's this cafe down the road, my treat. Katsumi nodded after a moment, while Ochako agreed, suddenly very downcast. The walk was long and almost torturously awkward, and even when they made it to the humble cafe and placed their orders they were silent, until Ochako spoke up right before Izuku did. Oh look, I don't want to come between the two of you. It's silly to think I'd stand a chance against a girl Deku's known for his entire life. I think I should just go, and save you guys the trouble. Katsumi scoffed and rested her head in her hands. Please, sweet, cute, and as big of a hero nerd as he is? You're like the perfect girl for him, she said miserably before Izuku spoke up. Both of you, enough. He demanded suddenly, irking both of them into surprise from the sudden and very Deku-like assertiveness. You're both incredible and selling yourselves short, which is shocking for you, Kachan. Honestly, I think if someone talked about you two the way you talk about yourselves, I'd beat them into the dirt. Katsumi and Ochako both blushed slightly, before nodding in understanding. Izuku sighed deeply. Okay girls, I have something to ask of both of you. Would you guys like to try polyamory? Excuse me? Katsumi asked immediately. Hear me out, he begged, suddenly bowing his head. Both of you deserve everything. Kachan, you've been my friend since forever. You're strong, smart, and have the confidence I could only dream of having. Ochako, you're the sweetest, most caring person I've had the actual blessing of meeting. You're the kind of person everyone wants by their side. His confession made them both blush and turn to each other before going back to him. Anyway, all of this to say I want to make you two happy even if I have to die for it. You don't deserve to be sad or in pain for even a second of your lives. If I can't do that for both of you, I'd happily pay it back with my life. Both were silent, before Katsumi crossed her arms and spoke up again. Do you think you can really do that? If we get into Udade without you, what then? And if you did get in, could you even handle all of that, and keep your promise? Izuku's answer came without hesitation or doubt. Absolutely. The blunt rudeness and confidence of his answer, in contrast to his typically reserved and nervous nature, spoke volumes. But there's something else too. He looked between them both. I want you two to be girlfriends, too. Both were taken aback, blushing deeper as they looked at each other. Ochako was shocked, but far from looking appalled, while Katsumi looked like she was having an internal conflict. If you two can't get along with each other, then how could we go on dates or hang out together and keep you two happy? After a moment, Katsumi sighed and looked away and down at the table. Well, I guess it could be worse, she admitted, while Ochako just rubbed her cheeks slightly with embarrassment. That doesn't sound so bad, she answered as well, before giggling. Why, you must really love Deku if you're willing to. Who said love? Katsumi suddenly barked, her face even redder, and Izuku deadpanned. Kachan, you were sobbing at the idea that Katsumi interrupted him by grabbing him by the collar and pulling him in. Shut up, damn it. I love you too, Kachan. He answered, before receiving his reply in the form of a slap that rocked him back into his seat with a small grunt, but a content smile. You know, Deku. You never finished saying that thing, at the gate. I love you, Uraraka. I love you girls more than I love myself. He answered, again, without hesitation. Ochako giggled and moved closer to him as Katsumi sputtered. Oh yeah? Prove it by keeping your damn promise. If you don't, I'll kill you myself, she ordered /threatened, scooching closer to him as well, as if saying that she refused to be outdone by Ochako, who wasn't even competing. Actually, Ochako intervened, I think you should love yourself too. There's plenty to love, right, Bakugo? Katsumi turned away slightly while blushing as Izuku chuckled, and hugged both girls by their backs. Of course, I will, Kachan, and I swear I will, Ochako. Katsumi huffed and pressed her head against his side, making him blush and actually clam up a little at the sudden contact. Although by the look of her it seemed like she was just as bashful about it, for the first time in her life. I'll believe it when I see it. Ochako put her head against his side as well, which made him blush even harder just as she did. I have faith in you, Deku. When Izuku woke up, he wasn't entirely convinced he was living in reality. He thought that perhaps he had gone into a heartbreak-induced coma after confessing to Tomi, and everything up to this very point was a wild fever dream. It sounded absolutely insane, but less considering that since then he met the god of love who told him that soulmates were real and that he had 100 of them, got attacked by a villain, got saved by All Might, got introduced to All Might, got recruited by All Might, then given his quirk, which apparently was a 200-year-old power passed down from person to person, and took the Udate exam, although he highly doubted he came close to making the cut, where he one-tapped a Godzilla-sized robotic abomination. And the most unbelievable part of it all, he now had 2 girlfriends, his childhood friend Katsumi, and Ochako, who saved each other's lives and confessed to each other on the same day, all of this, mind you, being within the past year and up to 3 days ago. And today was their first date. Just the thought of it made him buzz with delight. He sounded and looked like a child that couldn't express their happiness, and simply made wild-sounding happy noises. He was up before the crack of dawn to get freshened up, dressed, and prepared. He even spent a while attempting to tame and groom the wild canopy that was his hair. Next, use his encyclopedic knowledge to memorize any and everything he could to help from his notes, until he was looking himself over for the billionth and final time that morning, fretting over every little thing, or even just the outfit as a whole. Instinct told him to get something much more extravagant than his casual outfit of black pants, a t-shirt that read nice shirt and a jacket over it, as it was their first date, while the rest of him knew that it was probably best for their casual first date to visit a cat cafe. He gulped nervously before sighing. Even if he wasn't 100% satisfied with himself, it was leagues better than, say, a suit and tie or his school uniform or something. Checking the time, he decided it was time to go since he wanted to meet Katsumi at her house and then pick up Ochako from the station. Alright, I'm heading out, Mom, bye, he called, walking past her as she looked up, then paused as she looked over him. Is something wrong? HM? Oh no, Izuku, it's just, is there something important going on today? His immediate answer would have been to say yes it was, more important than meeting All Might, more important than the Udate exam, probably as or more important than his birth, and using every metaphor he could to overblow the statement, yes, I'm going on my first date with my 2 girlfriends. However, he chose to restrain himself because he still had no clue how to actually break the I have 2 girlfriends now news to her yet. And nothing really, I'm just going out with some friends. He explained in the single most conspicuous way possible. Oh, she answered, again studying his groomed, carefully adjusted appearance again. Izuku was never one to take extra time for his appearance, but today he was very well put together, and also seemed to be actually glowing from how much time he poured into it. But, knowing Izuku, it was probably because this friend was another girl he'd be confessing to. She sighed and got up, putting a hand on his shoulder. Alright, well, just take care of yourself, Izuku, and be safe, okay? She asked, as Izuku just chuckled and reassured her. Clearly, there was a sort of disconnect here, between Izuku, who couldn't be happier, and his mother, who was as worried as he was excited. Of course, thanks, Mom, but I'll be fine. I should go, I have to meet up with Kaken, and pick up my other friend at the station. Now, this was a little interesting to Inko, because while it was pretty typical of Katsumi and Izuku to hang out, she never remembered a time since they were about 8 that Katsumi willingly hung out with anyone except Izuku, and if Izuku was really going to confess to this person, she doubted he'd bring Katsumi along for the ride. She mentally shrugged it off, dismissing the notion entirely. Right. Goodbye, and I love you, Izuku. Love you too, goodbye, Mom. He said with a bit more cheer, quickly getting his shoes on before getting up to wave goodbye one last time, then hurrying out the door. However, only a few steps out the door he fell to his knees, the full weight of "I'm going on my first date with my girlfriends" hitting him once again, like MT Lady in giant form dropped on him from the top rope. Compared to his little display a few days ago when they all became a thing with the hugging and declaring that they were more valuable to him than his life as if he were some kind of shoujo protagonist, this was utterly puny. But what more could he do? It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, something that one thinks is cool, then spends the next 10 years lying awake at night with deep, soul-destroying regret. Izuku forced himself up, but an invisible force kicked him back down. He pressed his forearm against the ground and the other palm against it, forcing himself up with a groan under the weight of anxiety and expectations. "Excuse me, but are you okay there, young man?" Their neighbor, an older man dressed in a suit and tie, covered with a brown corduroy jacket and a matching hat. His face was a little squashed and fairly inexpressive, but even his confusion was clear as day. You see, I'm going on my first date today, and I'm just nervous." After a moment, the old man tipped his hat slightly. "Understandable. Good luck, young man," he wished, before walking off without another look or word. Finally, a little less than a minute later, Izuku came from the building, checking the time again before he heard Katsumi call out from the side. "Oi, Deku!" He jumped a little from surprise before turning to the right and perking up. "Kaken, Uraraka." "About time you came out," Katsumi said, brushing her hair to the side and behind her ear, and that's when Izuku noticed she had put up her hair into a rough, short ponytail with a dark green band and a small grenade-looking symbol on it. That was, once he had gotten his attention from their outfits. Katsumi's was a pair of jeans and a black t-shirt with a skull on the front finished with a nice-looking dark jacket. While it did look like her normal, casual clothing, her done-up hair combined with the small, subtle pieces of makeup just screamed, "I tried hard, but I don't want you to know that, nerd." Which Izuku found absolutely adorable, plus her small blush and half pout as she looked him up and down really added a small cherry on top. Ochako, meanwhile, had a blue skirt with black leggings, and a pink Letterman jacket, plus her 13 sash over the collar. She was a lot more open about her blushing and attempts at getting ready, giving off more air of a loving, eager, and inexperienced maiden. Neither one was better nor cuter in his eyes. In fact, the combination of tsundere and daradir duality made him want to melt into the pavement, gushing about sour and sweet deliciousness. However, because of how embarrassing that would have been, he just took a deep, reassuring breath and said, "You two look amazing today." "Thanks, so do you, Deku \W. Who asked you?" He just chuckled a little and walked forward with them as they set off. "Thanks, although I thought your train would come later. We were going to go and pick you up after I got to you, Kaken." Ochako just giggled a little as she rubbed the back of her head, while Katsumi looked away, a little flustered. "Well, I may have gotten a little excited and got ready early by a few hours, so I thought I'd just meet up with you guys," she explained, and Katsumi only huffed and brushed more of her hair to the side. "I just didn't want to wait for you," she admitted in a small tone, making Izuku smile wide and dopily before she snapped around to correct him. Because you'd be going so slow." Of course, sorry, Kaken." He apologized, playing into her denial while they both moved a little closer to his side since he was walking between them. Naturally, the newfound feeling of closeness still made him clam up slightly, and probably would for a long while. Anyway, I thought we could go closer to downtown. There's this new place I think you two would like. You especially, Kaken." Why, does it have a hero theme or an eating challenge?" she asked, her mind immediately going to having an opportunity to prove herself, as it often did. "No, it's a cat cafe," he said, watching as her eyes instantly snapped wide with surprise and realization before her blushing settled back in. You consider it, handsome bastard," she cursed internally, before huffing. "Congrats, Deku, that might be the best thing you've ever said to me." "Really?" Ochako asked, almost like she was talking to herself. I thought it would have been I love you, Kaken. Should it? Katsumi shouted back as Ochako giggled some more, before looking down slightly toward Izuku's side. When she did, she couldn't help but stare at his open, swinging hand with a few scars created in the exam. She gulped a little, before clearing her throat. Hey Deku? She asked, as Izuku perked up. Since we're walking together on our first date, would you like to I don't know, hold hands? She asked as Izuku seemed to freeze suddenly. His face then became very intense, almost like he was in pain, but on closer inspection was more like the overwhelming joy he was struggling to hold in. Yes, please, he cheered internally, before nodding. Oh sure, Uraraka. Almost squealing with delight, she opened her hand with her pinky aimed as far back as possible and led it towards Izuku's. Alright, apparently, 95% of couples like holding hands, so as long as I don't act weird. Oh my god, yes. Just at that moment, they took each other's hand, and they both turned slightly away, blushing harder than ever before. Her hand was soft and warm, and the small pads on her fingers felt soothing against his hand. His was more coarse and rough from training. It was as firm as it was warm and made her want to melt with delirious joy, just as Izuku did. So this is it, Nirvana. He thought in pure bliss, all this time, wondering what it would be like to hold my girlfriend's hand, and it's amazing, he thought, his dreams finally realized before deciding to try and save the situation from awkwardness. He just looked up and said, and nice weather, right? He asked, mentally slapping himself across the face. Why yeah, she answered in a lofty tone, moving her hand around slightly to feel his and enjoying every moment of it. It's really and nice and manly. The hell kinda weather is manly? Katsumi blurted out, looking down at Izuku's unoccupied hand, and swung hard enough to make a small clap, which caught him off guard until the sudden pain settled, and he was left with Katsumi firmly holding his hand. Granted, she was trembling out of embarrassment and kept going from oh gosh, this is amazing loose, and I don't want to be outdone firm. Either way, Izuku felt like the true winner here. So this is the power of hand-holding, incredible. The trio kept walking together in near silence, with only Katsumi even attempting to hide how much she enjoyed this. Hey, Deku, there's something else, Uraraka said, pressing into him a little more just before Katsumi did. Since we're dating and all, can you call me by my given name? Oh, of course, Ochako. He said, blushing brightly just to say it while Ochako gave a small, delighted squeak that she desperately tried holding down. And you can call me Izuku if you want. Ochako flushed slightly in flattery, before shaking her head slightly. No, Deku's a way cuter name, right, Bakugo? To which she immediately agreed by nodding her head, still embarrassed, and turned slightly away. Suddenly, Izuku perked up a little in realization. Oh, you two should call each other by your first names, too. He suggested, just as both seemed to hit the same realization. Ochako seemed a little more nervous as she blushed, while Katsumi's cheeks puffed out slightly. Now with himself as the one not embarrassed, he just smiled and gently pulled them both closer to himself, and closer to each other by proxy. You two have to get along and get close for this to work, right? Ochako leaned forward slightly to look at Katsumi, who was still stubbornly looking away. Katsumi, she said experimentally, making her just turn away again, which honestly hurt Ochako's feelings a little. However, what she didn't know was that Katsumi was now breathing way harder as she clapped her hand over her mouth. Damn it, she cursed, why the does she say it's so damn cute like that? Oh, Ochako, Katsumi started, before turning forward again and hiding her embarrassment internally, while Ochako and Izuku both seemed to light up. I want you to know, I'm still gonna call you round face from now on. Oh. Ochako replied, touched but still wildly unsure how to act, before Izuku leaned over slightly to whisper to her. That's pretty much just Kaken saying she likes you. Like hell it is. After a small light-hearted argument about Katsumi's way with words and a couple of minutes later, they finally arrived. It was a small, humble business in a mostly quiet and urban neighborhood, with a sign out front reading, Mustafa Cat Rescue and Cafe. And upon seeing it, Katsumi suddenly had no more arguments as she stared in awe. Honestly, it was such a sudden silence Ochako and Izuku couldn't help but laugh a little bit, albeit to themselves so they wouldn't ruin her mood. Finally she said, snapping out of her stupor, "Come on, move it," she said, yanking Izuku's hand and therefore pulling Ochako along as well. The party noticed that it looked just as it would from the outside. It was relatively small, homey, and neat. It was well furnished with wood and plenty of cushions, pillows, and rugs for the customers to sit and the cats to lounge around. It was humble and a little small for sure, but the owners and employees clearly took pride in their work. "Looks like there are not many customers right now, more for us then," Izuku noticed, looking over to the counters with cat treats and small toys, and the cashier stationed at the same wall with the menu up top. Katsumi, naturally, was the first to take her seat before the greeter even spoke, right in the middle of a comfy blue couch that curved kinda like a horseshoe, startling a pudgy white cat that reclined on the round table in front of it. As the cat nervously got back up and swished its tail, Katsumi slowly reached for it, her fingers spread wide as she giggled. However, it was Katsumi Bakugo, and so when she was giggling and reaching for the chubby cat, it gave less of the impression that she wanted it in her lap, but more as if she wanted it in the morgue. "Hiss!" it cried, scurrying backward as Katsumi sprang, hitting her stomach and bending over the table just as it hopped off the other side and trotted away. Then, an employee in a black outfit with a gray apron walked up nervously as Katsumi grit her teeth and clenched the table in frustration. He pushed his glasses up slightly as he addressed her. Excuse me, ma'am?" "Sorry, she just gets a little hyper," Izuku said, still holding Ochako's hand, who was looking around and awing at the cats lounging around, and at a pair who were chasing each other. "She's with us." "Ah, I see. So, what will it be today, sir, ma'am?" he asked as Izuku fished out his wallet. "Just an hour for the three of us." Just then, Katsumi had folded up a few yen bills in a wad and threw it at Izuku's head, gently bouncing off his head and into his palm while Ochako gasped. 2 hours, I mean," Izuku said, blushing and smiling nervously as he handed the shaking greeter his and Katsumi's yen. Katsumi was still pouting by the time Izuku and Ochako walked over, before getting distracted by another cat who was slim and tawny walking past, who Katsumi, again, sprang for with open arms, but ran away while yowling, leaving her growling with frustration. Ochako sighed with a small smile. "Katsumi, you should really be more gentle." In order to try and prove her point, Ochako got down and came closer to a smaller gray cat that was grooming itself on top of a pillow, but stopped once they noticed Ochako coming closer. Ochako stopped for a moment and smiled, before slowly moving her hand forward, but the cat scampered away as well. "Ah," she pouted, her shoulders dropping a little bit. "Here, try these." Izuku came to her side and crouched down while Katsumi got to his other side as he opened his hand, showing a handful of small cat treats that smelt like tuna. "We're strangers here, after all, so they'll probably make us seem more trustworthy, right?" Katsumi and Ochako quickly took some from the mound while thanking him before trying again. In typical Katsumi fashion, she just went after the cats while brandishing her treats like weapons as they scampered away from her in fear or annoyance. Ochako, meanwhile, laid them down in a pile and sat a couple of paces back. This strategy worked at the beginning, as a few of the cats swarmed around to take nibbles, but just as she scooched forward to pet them, they all opened wide to snatch as many treats as possible before running, in a more frightened chipmunk-like fashion than a cat-like one. Izuku wasn't having any luck either. He stayed still and calm, reaching out with a few treats in his palm, but they only took the closest one before backing up quicker than he could pet them. This would continue for the next 20 or so minutes as they grew increasingly desperate and or frustrated. "Darn," Izuku said as the same black cat finessed him for the third time, and was now probably bragging to the other cats. "Any luck, Kaken, Ochako?" No, they both said immediately, making Izuku frown a little as he got up again. That's fine, I'll grab some toys for us to use. He offered as Katsumi and Ochako nodded. Izuku sighed but put a hand on his chin as he thought while walking over to the mouse string toys. Dang it, we have most of our time left, he said to himself, taking 3 in his hand. Maybe they'll get used to us by then. As he talked, he suddenly drifted off as he looked over to the tallest scratch post that resembled a tree. Seated at the very top was an older cat with shabby black and gray fur. Its whiskers were especially long and their fur was long and whirly as well. It sat straight up and looked down with contempt as its tail swished left to right slowly. Additionally, its right eye was entirely white with barely a small shade of near-invisible light gray to mark the pupil. Izuku's eyes narrowed slightly. The cat's name was Totoro according to his collar. Slowly and carefully, Izuku approached as Totoro stared right down at him, his own eyes narrowing and squinting as the young man approached. So you call the shots here? Izuku asked, and Totoro barely made a sound in response. He looked back only to see Katsumi and Ochako trying to corner the same tawny cat, but just as they got closer it sprinted between the gap between them and ran off to the top of another, smaller scratching post. Looking back, he noticed Totoro looking over there as well, before turning back to Izuku as if to ask, "What do you want me to do about it?" Izuku slowly, and without looking away, reached into his pocket and pulled out a 1,000-yen note, drawing Totoro's attention away as he looked at it. His eyes widened slightly before turning back to Izuku. Well? Totoro gave a small, gruff-sounding purr as he leaned forward and took the note in his mouth, then turned around to drop and sit on it before looking back to Izuku. Meow, Totoro replied loudly before sitting upright once again. Izuku nodded to Totoro, and Totoro nodded back before Izuku turned to walk back to Ochako and Katsumi and gave the somber girls their mice toys. There, this should help, he assured as Katsumi lifted and waved hers softly. Just then, the same pudgy white cat that had first run from Katsumi trotted over to swat at it while Katsumi smiled wide, swinging it around to make him follow, and eventually onto her lap where she laid the mouse down, letting the cat lay on her lap and bite into it. Cackling with pride, Katsumi began to pat the cat's back and brush it down to the tail. About time you had recognized my greatness. From now on you will be known as Royal Explosion Murder Beast, she declared as Ochako leaned over to see. The tag says his name is Seabass, she said, too distracted to notice another cat walking up to her until it began to brush against her leg, making her gasp slightly as it began to rub its back and the top of its head against her. The cat was brown with a healthy coat and brown eyes, along with longer fur around the head that made her look like she had hair. Once she noticed that Ochako was paying attention, she meowed impatiently for attention, which Ochako happily gave. Izuku just smiled as they began to enjoy themselves, sitting down and putting down the mouse toy. They both seemed so radiant and content that as he watched he couldn't help but chuckle a little as a gentle warmth filled him. For the next 20 or so minutes they played and relaxed with the cats together, feeding them treats and learning their names or giving them better and more badass names, in Katsumi's case. Her favorite was still Royal Explosion Murder Beast, or Seabass, while Ochako's was a thin black cat named Shingetsu. Izuku, meanwhile, got fond of a large Siamese kitten named Spring. It was about an hour into their time before they were all seated together, euphorically happy while on the couch. Ochako, while playing with Shingetsu, looked up at the bar area and frowned a little. Katsumi and Deku both paid for this. Maybe I should. She pulled out her own wallet and looked inside. She didn't have much to spend, and even if she got everyone what they wanted she wouldn't really have anything left over for the tickets home. Hey, why don't I get us some drinks? Izuku offered as Spring sprang from his lap and onto the table. Black coffee, kaken? In response, she made a half-interested grunt while scratching Royal Explosion Murder Beast's pudgy belly. Ochako? Oh, she turned to look up at the menu, her eyes trailing down to the very bottom. Green tea. Yeah, just. She looked down at her wallet again and sighed. Here, you and Katsumi both treated us to this, let me handle it. So, what would you like, Deku? She asked with a small smile. Izuku only smiled back for a moment while she waited for his answer, before gently putting a hand on top of hers and her wallet, pushing down slightly as if to ask her to put it down. Ochako, you don't owe us anything. I want to give you two stuff like this because you deserve them. Besides, Kaken's just too proud to let me pay for anything for her, unless she gets me back. Katsumi gave a short grunt in agreement. So don't worry about the money, okay? He tilted his head slightly and smiled brightly, speaking in the same gentle tone she already grew to love. If you really think you need to pay us back, enjoy yourself as much as you can, and that's way more than enough. Ochako opened her mouth to speak, but only let out a small, high-pitched squeak considering how hard she was swooning. Aye, she stammered slightly, before clapping her hands over her face to hide her flustered expression, and after a faint glow emitted from her fingers, she began to float away like a balloon. Huh? Caught off guard, Izuku's mind needed a moment to catch up before he sat up straight and had her by the arm, pulling her down again. But just as she started floating again, Shingetsu, with an equally panicked look, jumped onto Ochako's lap, anchoring her to the seat. Laughing nervously, he watched as Ochako's fingers slowly fanned out, still blushing and looking away to the table. Do you really? I insist? She asked, watching as he eagerly nodded. Yeah, although I do have to confess something. He admitted, before looking very intense, for some reason, clenching his fist and his eyes as he spoke. I've always wondered how incredible it would feel to be able to spoil my girlfriend. It's a dream of mine, he confessed, making Ochako blush harder while Katsumi snapped slightly to attention. Spoil? Katsumi thought, letting the thought marinate in her mind for a moment before she froze entirely. The term spoiling was pretty much synonymous with her grandparents, who, despite Katsumi's protests, would always be treating her like a precious little princess, showering her with praise, gifts, and affection, which she had absolutely no way of handling, nor was she in touch enough to properly express herself. She almost shuddered while remembering when she was 5 and was over for the weekend, getting put in a frilly pink dress that she couldn't push off faster than her granny could put on her. However, as scarring as such memories were, hearing Izuku say it had a much different effect on her, she could imagine herself several years from now, reclining in her totally awesome hero costume, relaxing as Izuku pampered her and went along with her every whim, showering her in hugs, pats, praise, and even holding her hands while they kissed. Her breathing got slightly heavier as she blushed, unaware that Izuku had even gotten up after Ochako told him what she wanted. Not until he was finally back and presented her with her black coffee after a few minutes, gave Ochako a hot chocolate with peppermint, and himself a green tea with extra sugar. Ochako and Katsumi took an appreciative sip and sighed contently. Satisfied, Izuku took a sip of his tea as well. Katsumi, Deku, can I ask you guys something? Izuku turned, and Katsumi peered over the side of him. Of course, Ochako, what's up? He asked, taking another sip of his tea. Why do you guys want to be heroes? I can tell you two worked really hard for it, and are probably even more dedicated than I am, so I was just curious. She asked, making Izuku smile while Katsumi smirked and flung an arm around Izuku, pointing her thumb towards herself proudly as she answered. Because heroes are the coolest and the strongest, she answered proudly. People bowing in respect, villains cowering in fear, riches, fame, strength, and of course she hugged Izuku a little closer by flexing and reeling him in with a small yelp. Each other after that, she paused a little and blushed slightly, turning towards her coffee. But I guess you should be there, too, round face. Izuku gave a small chuckle as he sat up a little. Yeah, that'd be great, but I'm not really aiming for number 1 as intensely as Kacchan is. But I do want to be like All Might. Ochako giggled and tilted her head a little bit. But All Might is number 1, right? Well yeah, but that's not really what I find cool about him. He said, rubbing his head slightly with embarrassment. I've always wanted to be like him because even when everything looks helpless, He always saves people while laughing and smiling like there's nothing that can stop him. It's why he's the symbol of peace, because when he shows up, you know that everything will be okay and you can't help but smile too. I'd like to make people smile and feel safe like that too. He explained with a small sigh, a blush coming to his cheeks now that he was fired up. Ochako looked him over, slightly in awe before she smiled and took another sip. You two are really cool, you know that? She said, watching as Katsumi grinned proudly and Izuku looked a little flustered. Although I think you're well on your way, Deku. Because if I'm being honest, I do feel better when you're around. She admitted, just as flustered as he was. You too, huh? Katsumi asked without thinking, while Izuku's head snapped towards her, blushing harder with wide eyes. Of course I do, Ochako continued, looking fired up in the same way Izuku was a moment ago. After he totaled that 0-pointer when I was trapped, I always feel safe. Although she looked him in the eyes, a little more sternly as she puffed her cheeks. You have to be careful, it meant a lot to me, but if I knew you would have gotten that hurt, I would have just told you not to do it. At that, Katsumi suddenly stiffened and turned enough to glare at him slightly. Katsumi had never really bought the fact that his quirk had just developed super late, but on the other hand, she didn't exactly have a reasonable explanation either. Huffing slightly, she just flicked him on the side of his forehead. You're lucky I didn't tell Auntie Inko how bad you got messed up, Deku. She threatened, still knowing it was on the table. As far as Inko knew, he had only broken his arm and it wouldn't happen again, while also glossing over the fact that he nearly died from falling. Why yeah, thanks a lot, Kaken. He said, before turning back to Ochako. I'm sorry, it was my first time, and I just couldn't regulate it. It won't happen again, I swear, he promised them both before they both sighed. Katsumi knew Deku was usually good for his word but was wary, while Ochako was more inclined to wait for his actions. Anyway, why do you want to be a hero, Ochako? He asked, more than eager to change the subject. Ochako perked up a little, not being able to stop herself from smiling a little bit. Well, don't laugh or anything, but a big reason is for my parents. Izuku's head tilted a little bit. Are they heroes too? He asked, while Katsumi muttered something about her being lucky for having a cool family business under her breath. Her parents were both in the fashion business. She shook her head, no. They actually own a construction company. But, it's not going so well, it hasn't for a little while. So I wanted to be a hero to help them out a long time ago. They said they'd like to go on a vacation in Hawaii someday. She explained, with a small sigh under her breath. But that sounds greedy after what you said, huh? Not at all, Izuku insisted suddenly and loudly enough that the lounging cats right next to them or on them jumped a little. Sorry, you guys, anyway, it's not greedy at all. If you were anything less than an incredible person, you would have done anything else instead. You go for the job where you help people and keep them safe all day long. Then, he pointed behind him to Kaken with his thumb. Like how Kaken says she only wants fame and stuff, she's really just a softie who wants to help people. He managed to finish his sentence right before she whacked him over the head. Ochako just giggled, however, and scratched the back of her head, clearly embarrassed. I guess so, huh? Plus, I really felt what you said about making people smile. Just then, one of the staff had walked up and placed a large sundae before them all, with Deku being the only one not surprised by it. Oh, thank you very much, he said, while Ochako and Katsumi admired it. Massive scoops of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry, chunks of strawberry, shreds of chocolate over the top with whipped cream, plump cherries, and chocolate syrup over the top. And of course, 3 spoons peeking out the top. Izuku gulped deeply. Alright, I've always wanted to share a dessert with my girlfriend and now, I get to do it with both of them, he mentally cheered, his fingers trembling as he nervously reached for the center spoon. Here, Deku. Eat up, nerd. Suddenly, Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts as Katsumi and Ochako both brought their spoons to his mouth. Watch doing round face? Katsumi asked, her voice dangerously low and her brow furrowed before she suddenly jutted her spoon closer to his mouth, followed swiftly by Ochako doing the same. Just seeing if Deku wanted any, Katsumi. Ochako replied, just as dangerous but under the thinnest veil of a friendly smile. Sensing a crisis on the horizon, Izuku took a deep breath of air and did the only thing there was to do. He opened as wide as he could like a tree frog, and took both spoons into his mouth, struggling to lick both clean off with a hum of delight from the taste, as Katsumi and Ochako looked at him, bewildered. Please don't fight," he requested, desperation lacing his voice. For a moment, both girls could only look at him, then at each other, mirroring the other's exact situation. It took a moment for the embarrassment to kick in, but once it did, they both simply took the spoons away from his mouth. Sorry, Katsumi," Ochako said, nervously laughing while Katsumi just turned away and crossed her arms, refusing to show her embarrassed face. Yeah. Sorry. She grunted simply. Izuku sighed in relief, praising the success of his self-training in preparation. He felt as though it was safe to say that it was a crisis averted just as suddenly as it began. I guess that means it's my turn. Then he was met with another issue. He had one spoon, and two mouths to feed simultaneously. He stared down at his spoon for a moment in horror, before realization hit him. Kaken, can I see your spoon? Katsumi handed it to him, right before he stuck both into the ice cream. Then, he raised both spoonfuls to Ochako and Katsumi, who were both blushing slightly. Then, Ochako and Katsumi both perked up as they blushed harder, their eyes widening as they stared down at their spoon. Isn't this an indirect kiss? They both thought, realizing that Izuku had taken both spoons in their mouths simultaneously. Ochako and Katsumi lunged like sharks, biting down while the entire curved end was inside their mouths hard enough to make a loud clack. Their faces were strained and intense, in the same fashion Izuku's was when he talked about being able to spoil his girlfriends, and he was absolutely horrified by the sudden change in demeanor. Just as quickly as she attacked, Katsumi pulled away, crossing her arms and chewing with an especially bright red and angry face. I was just hungry, don't think imto it, she excused. What did I do to make you so angry you're chewing your ice cream? Izuku asked in vain before he noticed that Ochako was just about moaning and savoring her ice cream like it was something holy. Hey, are you two okay? He asked testily, but upon receiving no answer, he just shrugged, and just chalked it up to the ice cream just being that good. He handed back Katsumi her spoon, who quickly snatched it from his hand and began to eat again, until something suddenly clicked in her head. Wait, what about the first actual kiss? And she froze, turning her eyes towards Izuku and Ochako, who was making some more small talk. I mean, I want it, but Deku's way too nice to just cuff it up to either one of us first. Deku was laughing, and she stopped for a moment to watch him some more. From the way she saw it, he was dating them for her own and Ochako's sake, to make them happy, and them alone, even if couldn't be. It was a very Deku-ish thing to do, for better or for worse. So, what we're thinking, Kaken? Eh? She asked, suddenly snapping from her thoughts after being addressed. Frankly, what she was thinking about was the last, and most awkward thing she could think of talking about. Ochako and I were just talking about what we wanted for our hero costumes, so I wanted to know what you were thinking for yours. Izuku explained politely, with an equally kind smile. Katsumi felt a sense of relief mixed with a rush of her heart throbbing. Oh, right, I already made a few diagrams and pieces to send over. It's gonna be totally badass, she promised, clenching her fists and making a very familiar, very scary enthusiastic expression. I'm having big grenade gauntlets that are going to be super tough so I can block and hit better, and they're going to be storing my sweat, so the pin in it's gonna set off a massive ass explosion. Then, totally breathlessly, she continued to explain and play up all the sick, badass, awesome, and highly questionable qualities of her suit, such as her metal knee pads, which she wants specifically in order to knee someone to death before they began to trade ideas like how Izuku wanted his to emulate All Might's look, along with a utility belt, and special gloves to help withstand his quirk, or how Ochako's had as many features as possible to help with her nausea, along with a cute astronaut look. And simultaneously, they traded bites of ice cream, reaching to their lefts and rights to feed each other, and Ochako and Katsumi even crossed over Deku to feed each other a single bite. The conversation kept going and turning to different topics slowly, like what they liked about other heroes' costumes, then their favorite heroes, then their schools, and they were just starting to talk about U.A as the ice cream was finished. With less than an hour to go, they finished their drinks quickly to meet and play with as many cats as possible. Including Totoro, Senjutsu, Spring, and Royal Explosion Murder Seabass, there were 16 named cats in total, like the long-haired brown cat Kochachi, and a skittish Tawny River, who, by the time they would leave, would only ever respond to the name Saber-toothed Conqueror Huntress II, who would go on to have a proud lineage carrying her name, from Saber-toothed Conqueror Huntress III, the merciful to Saber-toothed Conqueror Huntress the 29th, the cruel. Anyways, Izuku and Ochako were left covering for Katsumi for about 10 minutes while she struggled not to cry, saying her goodbyes and promising to eventually return. Finally, Ochako was patting her shoulder as they left, and Izuku stalled behind for a few moments longer to turn his head back towards Totoro. Totoro slowly and lazily blinked before nodding, and Izuku nodded back one last time with an oddly serious expression, before following the girls out. That was pretty fun. I'm glad the cats finally warmed up to us, instead of running the entire time. Ochako chirped, eagerly taking Izuku's hand and blushing, smiling wide as she tightened her lips to not let out an embarrassing squeak of happiness. Yeah, I'm happy they were friendly. Izuku added, taking Katsumi's hand as well as happiness swelled inside him again, overflowing until he just emitted a bright, happy aura like a light bulb. Katsumi blushed harder and shifted, huffing to herself and looking away before suddenly and angrily chiding herself for doing so. How can I even think about kissing him, when I can't even look at him while holding his stupid hand? She yelled internally, before snapping her head back towards him. So where now? I don't feel like wasting the rest of the weekend. Izuku just shrugged. I'm not sure there's a park close by we can sit down and chat at, since it's pretty nice out. He suggested. Or we can go out and eat if you guys didn't get full from the ice cream. That sounds nice, Ochako said, looking around. I haven't been around here in ages, so if either of you knows a place, I'll be happy to come. Katsumi and Izuku thought about it, before perking up at the same time. Hey, Kaken, do you remember that great ramen place near here? He asked, while Katsumi grinned. Hell yeah, Fujiwara, she declared, pumping her fist before walking faster, pulling Izuku and Ochako behind her, resembling a train leading two carts behind it. Soon enough, Izuku and Ochako both had to jog to keep up with her so they wouldn't get dragged across the ground. He looked back to Ochako and smiled apologetically. Sorry about Kaken, she can be really enthusiastic but it can be really cute. Suddenly, Katsumi came skidding to a halt, hard enough to send up dust and tear the ground with her foot, probably creating several tripping hazards in her wake. Huh? Are we here already? Izuku asked, looking around before Katsumi turned around and seized him by the collar. I'm what? She demanded, pulling him closer and roaring in his face. Over these last 10 or so months he grew steadily, and now she didn't quite have such a noticeable height above him anymore, so now he was just standing up straight, rather than lifted onto his tippy toes or lifted off the ground as he would have been before. She bared her teeth and gave the most ferocious, standoffish look she could give, but all he did was giggle right in her face, forcing her on the back foot. See? She's embarrassed by the compliment. That's so cute, Kaken. Both of Katsumi's fists were shaking by now, and she was huffing angrily, although her apparent rage was betrayed by how red her cheeks were, and how her lips quivered and rapidly changed from a scowl to an embarrassed, lovesick grin. Ochako felt on edge for a few moments, before sighing and watching fondly as Izuku and Katsumi struggled and talked. Anyone could see how close the two were, being two friends turned lovers who'd been with each other since, according to them, they were born. She would have been lying if she said she never felt a little out of place beside them. She shifted slightly on her feet, then looked down at her hand, which was now slightly scarred from the entrance exam a few days ago. She slowly ran her thumb over it and held on a little tighter, smiling just a bit wider. She felt like it was an odd thought to have, but she adored Deku's hand. Okay, I'm really sorry, Kaken, I just can't really help it, he finally apologized, while Katsumi just turned and huffed. But we are getting there soon, so I hope you'll enjoy yourself too, Ochako. Ochako perked up slightly and nodded, waving her thoughts away before smiling up at him. Why, yeah, sounds great. With Katsumi now walking instead of charging through the streets with them both in tow, they reached Fujiwara's in the next couple of minutes. As Ochako had discovered, it was an empty, cozy little ramen shop, pretty basic and probably older than they were, but she felt right at home as she entered with them, who were both beaming with excitement and nostalgia. As they sat together on 3 side-by-side stools, Ochako was relieved to also find it was pretty well priced. Death by heat chicken over here, firm noodles. Katsumi ordered, barely looking up at the menu, while Izuku had his hand on his chin, muttering about the different choices, before his eyes wandered further down and stalled. Oh, I'll have the pork bone broth, with firm noodles, please, he ordered to the chef, before they turned to Ochako. I'll have the same as him, thank you, she asked, before the chef soundlessly nodded and turned, already hard at work. You guys have been here before, right? Izuku nodded, Last time was because Kaken got sent home early for beating someone up a couple of years back, so we got lunch before her parents found out, since it was still kinda early in the morning. He recalled, while Katsumi rolled her eyes and scoffed. Bastard deserved it, she added, before Izuku rounded on her. Kaken, he didn't even do that much to me. He took your notebook you were working on, and he was gonna throw it in a fountain. You took his arm. He had 8. Has 7. You'd do the same for me, she accused, jabbing his chest. Well, probably, but Kaken? Katsumi seemed to zone out, looking down at his pecs as her finger pressed against it, before poking it a little harder. Kaken, are you okay? Instead of verbally answering, her mind just seemed to go even further away as she poked it again. Katsumi, stop groping, Deku, Ochako suddenly bursted, her hands against the counter and lifting herself up and over his head, staring down at Katsumi and Izuku with a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. Izuku and Katsumi froze with their eyes wide open, with Izuku suddenly furiously red, while Katsumi froze, seeming to realize what she herself was doing. Even the chef stopped moving around for just a split second before starting up again. Without another word, Katsumi just spun around to face forward to the counter again, her lips shut tight as she fidgeted in her seat. Izuku just chuckled nervously and did the same with his elbows propped up on the counter, before turning to Ochako. Thank you. And it took about until their food was served until Izuku and Katsumi were even remotely back to normal again. After thanking the chef for their food, Ochako lifted a few noodles from the broth and blew on it as Izuku and Katsumi already took an eager pick of noodles and toppings, and simply glowed with delight. Ochako turned back to her bowl, shrugged, and took the bite, and her eyes suddenly widened with shock, leaving her stunned for a few moments before she quickly ate the mouthful of noodles, gushing happily and giving a happy sigh. I know, right? Izuku said, nudging her slightly with his elbow as Katsumi perked up, targeting her toppings, which were mostly slicings of ghost and butlet peppers first. She nodded excitedly and began eating just as eagerly as they were. However, after a few more bites, Izuku began to slow down a little, looking down from Ochako to Katsumi. He stopped eating and just appreciated the sight and the silence. With a small chuckle to himself, He happily took another bite of ramen as he began to think we could do stuff like this all the time, just relaxing together, eating together, studying, whatever we want when we get to U.A. We could do this practically all day. Then, his smile fell a little, and he rested his hand and put the noodles back into the bowl instead of biting it, then let out a small, miserable sigh. Well, if I even get to U.A., that is. He blinked and noticed that Katsumi and Ochako had both closed the distance towards him considerably, their heads tilted slightly as they looked up to him, clear worry etched onto their faces. Is something wrong? You tell us. Katsumi asked bluntly, setting her chopsticks down for the moment. Izuku, however, just waved dismissively, looking impassive and uncharacteristically dull, which only made them both a little wearier. Nothing. I am having the best day ever, having our first date, with the two prettiest girls ever. I haven't got a right to be down right now, he said, feigning amusement. Izuku had his chopsticks in his ramen, slowly stirring the half-empty contents of his bowl. That's why I think you two are better people than I am, he said, smiling in appreciation and fondness for the both of them. Kaken's confidence and spirit are totally invincible, and Ochako's always optimistic. Ochako sighed, and so did Katsumi. You're worried about getting into U.A., right? I get it, Deku, but be honest with yourself, you did awesome out there, you looked like a real hero already. Granted, she would have said that with a tad less confidence if it weren't for the trip she made the day after the entrance exam, where she asked to transfer Deku a few of her points, but instead Present Mike just patted her on the head and told her not to worry, but it was a little embarrassing to admit to, and Izuku would probably fret about her chances of getting in, and it would probably come as better news when he got the official letter. Ochako and Katsumi just looked up to him, smiling fondly simultaneously, although Katsumi's was more of a slight smirk. I think round face said it best. Katsumi started, resting her head on her propped-up hand. Any school for heroes would be lucky to have you, and they're downright retarded not to. Ignoring the fact that Katsumi formed a totally different sentence than her own, Ochako just nodded along. We'll all join together, okay? She promised, before looking slightly more toward Katsumi, who looked back, and after a moment, she nodded and Ochako nodded back. They all finished their meals in comfortable silence and left, all three holding hands as they began walking again in the orange and cozy glow of the early sunset, walking along the sidewalk. It's getting pretty late, isn't it? Ochako finally spoke, in a soft voice filled with longing and sadness. I think I should head home before my parents start worrying about me or anything, she explained, ending with a small sigh. That's probably for the best, Izuku added, sighing as well. Kaken and I can walk you down to the station. While Katsumi nodded. The trio, all hand in hand, walked to the station further downtown, talking again about their date, from their favorite cats at the cafe, the other shops they would have liked to visit, and the things they wanted to try, and by the time they sat at the benches to wait for Ochako's train, they were already planning for their next date. Ochako was more interested in going to a museum for their astrology exhibit, while Katsumi wanted to visit a batting rink she and Izuku went to a long time ago, and Izuku considered himself blessed to find himself even in a conversation like this. Anyways, by the time the train had actually come, they were just as unsure as they were when they began but had no complaints at all. Oh, that's my train, Ochako said just as it was pulling in, slowly getting from her seat. I had a lot of fun today. She turned around and smiled with a brightness to rival the sun, making Katsumi wince slightly as Izuku just basked in its glory. I'm really happy we're dating, Deku, Katsumi. And before Izuku could reply, she already closed the distance, hugging him around the middle, causing him to short-circuit and turn into a blushing, stammering mess of nerves until he just shut up and hugged her around the waist, giving each other a gentle squeeze for a few moments, before she came off him, smiling wide and giggling with a bright red face and running off to catch her train. As the door closed behind her, she eagerly peered through the window and waved to them, and he just as eagerly waved back. When the train fully left, Izuku just gave a lovesick sigh and turned to Katsumi. Ready to walk home? Katsumi just huffed and held out her hand, and Izuku took it as they stood up and left. The majority of the walk was pretty wordless between the two, as Izuku could feel a low burning fury within Katsumi. Finally, they stepped in front of her front gate, still holding hands. So, I'll talk to you tomorrow, Kaken. Have sweet dreams, okay? He asked, smiling gently, and she only nodded, and turned to leave. Night, Deku. Then, quicker than she could have anticipated, Izuku hugged her from behind, around the waist and with his head against the back of hers. She froze up completely, her eyes wide and her cheeks furiously red. She was caught in a half-step, so she slowly moved her foot and hand back, puffing her cheeks in a fit of attempted rage. Attempted, I say, because she couldn't truly bring herself to actual anger. "What are you doing, dummy?" she asked softly, with the tiniest tone of strained bitterness. He didn't answer right away and instead breathed deeply. "I just thought you would have liked a hug. Was I wrong?" He lifted his head slightly and spoke right behind her ear in a soft and caring tone that she loved so much. "I didn't make you upset, did I?" Katsumi reached one hand and curved it slightly, hugging his head while blushing even harder. "No." She pulled him a little closer. "You were perfect, Deku, good night." After a final goodbye, Katsumi waved him off before she entered, still blushing and barely keeping in the quivering, embarrassed, and wide smile she was hiding away from Izuku. Then, as she locked the door behind her and came past the walkway, she saw her father with an expression that instantly annoyed her, a tight-lipped grin full of total satisfaction, holding a mug right beneath his mouth. "Hi, Katsumi. Have fun today?" he asked, while Katsumi just puffed her cheeks out and blushed again, then simply waved him off and turned to go to her room. "Fine. Thanks." Masaru took a long, slow sip from his mug, before pulling it away as Katsumi was halfway up the stairs. So Katsumi stalled. "You and Izuku, huh?" Katsumi bowed her head slightly in shock while blushing furiously, then marched up the stairs twice as fast as before. She also either didn't hear that or furiously ignored her father saying it was only a matter of time into his mug. Naturally, Izuku, Katsumi, and Ochako kept in touch in a group chat, which was just titled with 3 different hearts. Green, orange, and pink, for obvious reasons. So when the 7th day came since their entrance exam, and everyone had eagerly watched their acceptance holograms, and shed a few tears in Izuku's case, they came together again on the 8th day since, which was the last day of their vacation, in a park near the train station. They were all sitting on a plaid sheet in a triangle formation with 2 baskets between them. Izuku and Katsumi got together beforehand to make blueberry muffins and small brownies, while Ochako had bought some packaged chocolate snack cakes the day before. Additionally, they all had traveling mugs of tea, which they all raised and clinked together, shouting "U.A, here we come," before taking a deep, joyous drink all together at once. Ochako came up for air the soonest and hooped happily, before getting a brownie from Izuku and Katsumi's basket. After taking a bite, the other 2 could have sworn they heard her moaning, but they quickly brushed over it. Katsumi jabbed Izuku's side with her elbow while grinning. "We told you you'd make it in, Deku, now what, huh?" Izuku giggled and took a muffin. "How was I supposed to know about the secret points? Either way, I'm not complaining," he said, happily shrugging before he bit into the muffin. Ochako quickly scarfed down the rest of her brownie with a small shiver of happiness. "To be honest, those are probably the reason I got in too, but scraping all those robots sure helped too." Izuku's eyes widened, and he quickly swallowed the muffin so he wouldn't speak with his mouth full and spit it all over. "Speaking of, why'd you want to give me your points? You won them, fair and square," he fretted, while Ochako looked amused. "I knew it," she thought to herself. "You would have done the same. Besides, you were saying you had no points, and I wanted to help you out." Katsumi grabbed a snack cake. She's got you there, Deku. You're way too nice for your own good. And Ochako looked aghast. Too nice? That's like saying you have too much money. It can happen, you know. Katsumi defended her point, before pointing her thumb at him. Besides, Deku's gotten himself hurt over and over again for it. If that's not too nice, I don't know what is. Deku, now flustered, just waved dismissively. Hey, it's just a hero's duty, right? Bullshit. Kaken. No, she has a point. Ochako intervened, while Katsumi hummed with appreciation, biting off the wrapper of her snack cake and spat it out, then bit it and dragged it out of its plastic shell. You're just a good person, Deku. Izuku blushed deeply, looking like the world's biggest and good-looking strawberry. Says you, what was that about wanting to make people smile too and looking out for your parents? Katsumi snorted. Never thought I'd see two people arguing about the other being the better person. She added in between bites, while Izuku got her by one arm and hugged her. Hey, you're a good person too, Kaken. She only blushed in response and flicked his nose to make him get back in his seat. I'm right though, aren't I? Ochako was a lot less sure of it than Izuku was, but after this week of knowing her and their date, she grasped that under her raging, scary exterior, there was a heroic, sweet girl who wanted to do good, so she nodded. Katsumi whined slightly under her breath, refusing to look either of them in the eye. Please don't be like that, Katsumi, we're only telling the truth here. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, Kaken. Can I do anything to make it up to you? Her answer came within the very second he asked, kiss me. Judging from her equally shocked and embarrassed expression to Ochako and Izuku, she said it completely without speaking. But if there was also anything Ochako had learned about her, it was that Katsumi didn't admit fault. Katsumi Bakuga doubled down. Why, you heard me, she demanded, suddenly turning to him. Or is that not a part of anything? Izuku was more than flustered and frozen, as stiff as a board, which was unusual, as Izuku normally got jumpy, twitchy, and erratic when he was nervous. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Okay. Katsumi's blush redoubled and she faltered again, but her pride welled up again, and her pride alone made her crawl forward, having the distance between them which wasn't even a few feet to begin with. Ochako was suddenly snapped out of her stupor and rushed to his other side in the blink of an eye. But I want Deku's first kiss too, she whined, suddenly grabbing his sleeve, despite having none of the confidence or nerve to do so. We can't both have the first kiss, Katsumi protested, before Izuku's hand settled on them both nervously and slightly shaking, with his face glowing even brighter. Yeah, there is a way, if you're up for it. Both of them stared up at him for a moment, before blinking with a blank expression, then looked down at each other and paused. The thought didn't exactly fill either of them with dread, really, but it wasn't exactly ideal. Then, Ochako slowly raised her hand and offered it to her. We can kiss him individually later, but let's just do it so it's fair, she offered. Katsumi took a deep breath, took Ochako's hand, and shook it as she exhaled before they both suddenly snapped their heads toward Izuku. Izuku, however, was completely stunned and wide-eyed from their bout of cooperativeness and was totally helpless as they tackled him, his upper body falling on the grass past the sheet as they held themselves over each of his sides. Izuku blinked, then gasped as he fully processed the sight above him. Like two descending, close, beautiful, and blushing angels. They were as nervous as he ought to have been, but he couldn't help but simply stare at them both, his eyes drifting from Katsumi's face to Ochako, then back again, memorizing each microscopic detail of their faces. I love you both. He suddenly gasped out, before Katsumi and Ochako descended. It was as messy and cramped as they would have guessed. It was all their first time. Half of their lips touched someone, and the other half was someone else, each moving to their own tempo, and their cheeks mashed against each other as well. Plus, the taste of chocolate and tea was pretty overpowering and made their lips sticky. It was a perfect first three-way kiss. After a few moments, Ochako and Katsumi both pulled away, panting and falling to the side, laying with their backs to the grass like Izuku was. And also like Izuku, they were left gasping, redder than ever, staring up at the blue sky, and in total shock, as they felt like their hearts would explode in their chests. After a minute or two longer, Izuku's hands shifted until they found Katsumi's and Ochako's, and their fingers slowly clasped around his. Wow, Izuku gasped out finally. Why yeah. Why you're a great kisser. Neither Ochako nor Katsumi asked who he meant, and instead, they just said thank you, you too. In flushed, quiet unison. A round face? You have a really soft face. Thanks YUW were kinda rough. Sorry. I liked it. Same. Izuku agreed. I liked your soft face. Same. He repeated, this time with a small nod, grass now stuck in the back of his hair, not that anyone would notice in his dense canopy-like hair. They watched an airplane go from one side of their vision and disappear past the other before Izuku spoke up, breaking the silence. I kinda wanna do that again. Same. Both Katsumi and Ochako answered at once, before moving on top of him again, this time ever more determined. Katsumi woke up the next morning feeling like she won the #1 hero spot, like confidence incarnate. And she made sure everyone knew it, too. Especially her classmates, those poor souls. Firstly, she made Izuku stay with her outside until the bell rang so that the entire class would be in their homeroom, and she also made him bring his acceptance letter. Why, you ask? Well, that's so she could hold them high and victoriously in her hand as she kicked the door in, holding Izuku under her other arm like luggage. I told all you bitches, she announced, waving the letters shamelessly while Izuku covered his red, glowing face under his hands. She marched through the entire classroom, taking the longest path possible to get to their seat while flaunting them. And quite frankly, no one had broken out of their initial shock enough to tell her off, including the odd teacher. You all knew I'd make it, but not a single one of us thought DKU would make it, huh? She roared, barking into one boy's face, who she heard specifically say Deku couldn't make it into U.A, due to his quirklessness. When she was finally done, she dropped Izuku next to his seat. Who scrambled into it, hiding his head under his arms. Kaken, please. Yeah, 1 second Deku, she rounded on the teacher and pointed at him. You're supposed to encourage students, you old jerk, and guess what? Kaken, Izuku groaned, now lifting his head to speak clearer. Deku's gonna be a hero, she roared, as Izuku blushed behind her, and I hope he saves your bum ass someday. Kaken, he suddenly got up and put a hand on her shoulder, making her snap around towards him. Yeah? Blushing harder than ever and with his lips shut tight, he closed his eyes and suddenly pulled Katsumi towards himself and leaned forward, bending over his table slightly as he kissed her, making the entire watching, stupefied, confused, and odd class gasp while Katsumi squeaked into his mouth. Finally, after a few moments, he pulled away, quivering on his feet. See, can you please calm down? Now just as embarrassed as he was, she nodded slowly and shyly. Oh okay, Deku. They both sat down, but Izuku retreated under his arm fortress, and Katsumi looked down at her desk, sitting straight and with her hands clasped tight together under the desk. The teacher, now that he recovered his voice, turned back to his desk and muttered under his breath and wrote something on his clipboard. Tardy, not absent. Tardy, not absent. A quirk may not have passed on to him from his parents, but Izuku was certain the ability of super tears were passed down the Midoriya line. He had it, and his mother sure did too, and she demonstrated as such when he stood before her dressed in the UA student uniform. "Am my baby all G grown up?" she hiccuped, taking another picture of him. Following H's dream of being a HH hero. Izuku rubbed his arm awkwardly. At a point like this, he felt like the right move was just to hug her and assure her that everything was alright, but at the same time, being any more involved with it typically led to him crying too, so he just smiled assuringly at her as she took picture after picture. Eventually, however, she let him go to the door and put on his shoes. Okay, he turned back to his mom and saw how proud, yet how nervous she was. Probably just as, if not more nervous than he was. So, he smiled, letting her know that everything would be okay. "Bye, Mom. I'll see you after school." Inko smiled and nodded to him. "MHM. Just remember that I'm really proud of you, Izuku. Stay safe, dear." Izuku smiled, his shoulders dropping slightly when they were so tense just a moment ago. "Thanks, Mom, and don't worry, it's going to be short since only initiation day." "Love you," he said, leaving as the two waved to each other, and just as quickly as he left, he locked the door behind him and ran off to be out of the front door of the complex as soon as possible, and just as he left the door. "Good morning, Deku / hey, nerd." He instantly snapped to the right and was instantly hit with a now slightly familiar feeling of euphoria and shock induced by the sight of his beautiful girlfriends. However, this attack was way more effective than any normal attack as they were hitting him in a weak point he himself didn't know he had up until now: his schoolgirl uniform fetish. Ochako's was very put together and careful, her tie done perfectly, unlike his, which was short and wide and with full-length black leggings which he found himself looking at, only for his face to burn red before snapping up again to her smiling and eager face which hid a small layer of nervousness. Katsumi, meanwhile, wore her uniform in a textbook delinquent fashion. Her tie was gone and the top few buttons of her shirt were undone, her jacket was fully open and hung off her shoulders almost like a cloak. Also opposed to Ochako, she had a normal pair of black socks, showing her muscular legs. He stopped to fully appreciate them, his hands covering his mouth as he muttered on about their cuteness and how well the uniforms fit them, and he would have continued if it weren't for Katsumi grabbing his shoulder and dragging him along while she and Ochako walked past. "Gee, good to know, but let's go before we're late. And don't think I liked that compliment, or anything, got that?" "Ah, Kaken," he squeaked internally but made sure he didn't let anything slip. Nodding, he quickly recovered and began to walk with them, and soon after they all decided it would be better to jog there together. Plus, they tried making small talk or catching up since they last hung out in person, but no one could really focus on that, especially as UA entered their sights and as they approached closer. Besides, just entering UA wouldn't have gotten them so excited. No, the best part, by some mystic stroke of luck, they all had the same class 1A. After passing the gates, Izuku dashed ahead and damn near shoulder bashed the door open, prying it open for Katsumi and Ochako, who breathlessly thanked them as they passed. They felt invincible, untouchable as they went through the corridors, but then, Katsumi began to stall behind them before coming to a near total stop. "No ing way," she grumbled, drawing Izuku's and Ochako's attention. "Is something wrong, Kaken?" "No," she answered gruffly, before jabbing her thumb behind her. "I just realized I maybe gotten my first bad fan." With their brows slightly furrowed, they each leaned over the side of Katsumi to look behind her and saw a girl a wide distance away. And to be honest, she certainly stood out a lot. She had spiky, red hair that was raised upward almost like a mountain's peak. Her eyes were also the same shade of deep red, and from here it was still pretty clear that she was heavy with muscles. Like how Izuku and Katsumi had more athletic builds that were good for high mobility, she resembled more of a brawler. The red-haired girl was waving excitedly behind them, more focused on Katsumi than Izuku or Ochako, and before either of them could wave back, Katsumi shoved them both forward. "Don't engage her, keep it moving," she commanded, yanking them to the right and to a staircase. Of course, the problem was that neither of them was sure where to go. After a moment of collective wondering, Katsumi looked back, growled, then grabbed Ochako's sleeve. "Me and Round Face are checking down here, Deku, go up," she barked, already quickly descending the steps. "Yes ma'am," he responded instinctively, running up the stairs. Within a few minutes, he finally found the right corridor, with a sign reading classes 1A to 1B. "Great," he cheered to himself, walking further down the hall while taking out his phone and bringing up their group chat. "I'd better tell the girls that I found it," he said, before turning the corridor and suddenly slamming into someone, causing himself and the person he ran into to yell in surprise. He fell on his backside and groaned slightly before his eyes suddenly shot open, and he scrambled to quickly get up and offer his hand. "I am so sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going then." He suddenly realized it was the red-haired girl from earlier. "Oh, so she followed me up here. Wait, have I been going in a circle?" She laughed and sat up, before looking up at him. "Nah, it's fine bro." Now that they were in close proximity, and her attention was fully on him, they made full, direct eye contact.